Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The quiet contagion, the pink noise. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My world is built on sound. As a freelance audio engineer and sound designer, I don't just hear things, I dissect them. I live in waveforms, in frequencies, in the subtle architecture of noise that defines a space. My apartment, a sterile box in a new development just outside Seattle, is my sanctuary, acoustically treated, obsessively organized, a fortress of controlled silence. My job is to create auditory worlds for games and films, to build emotion from sine waves and Foley. My ears are my livelihood, my curse, and, as it turns out, my only defense. The first time I noticed the anomaly, I was in a place designed for sensory overload, the flagship branch of Converger, a grocery store chain that sold kale chips for $12 and promised enlightenment in every kombucha. I was standing in front of the dairy section, paralyzed by the choice between 7 different types of oat milk, when it hit me. It wasn't the hum of the massive refrigeration units, that was a steady G-sharp, a 60-cycle thrum I could filter out in my sleep. It wasn't the distant whir of the ventilation or the cheerful beeps of the checkouts. This was something else. A sound beneath the sound. It was a soft, static-like hiss, dimensionless and pervasive. It was the auditory equivalent of a blank wall. Pink noise. Not the harsh, high-frequency sizzle of white noise, but a fuller, gentler spectrum, like a distant, cosmic waterfall. It had no source. It was simply there. An overlay on reality. I closed my eyes, tilting my head, trying to triangulate its origin. Impossible. It was inside my skull and outside in the world, simultaneously. Finding everything okay? I jumped. A store employee, a kid with bright green hair and a name badge that read Kai, was smiling at me. "Yeah, sorry. Do you hear that?" I asked, feeling foolish. Kai's smile didn't waver. He tilted his head in a parody of my own listening posture. "Hear what?" "That, humming. Hissing sound. Like static." He blinked slowly, a placid look settling over his features. "Oh, that," he said, his voice dropping into a calmer, more melodic register. "Yeah. I hear it. What is it? Is one of the freezers dying?" "No," he said, his smile becoming serene. "It's just the store. It's always here." He straightened a carton of almond milk. "It's nice, isn't it? It helps me focus." He walked away, leaving me standing in the refrigerated aisle. "It helps me focus." The phrase was so bizarre, so disconnected from the nature of the sound. The noise wasn't focusing, it was blanketing. It was the sound of nothing. I bought my oat milk and fled. On the drive home, I blasted a complex piece of orchestral music, something with a wide dynamic range, trying to scrub the phantom frequency from my ears. But even in the crescendo, I could feel it lingering at the edges, a ghost in the machine. That night, I ran a full diagnostic on my own ears. I sat in my studio, the door sealed, and generated tones. Pure sine waves, sweeping from the lowest rumbles to the highest, dog whistle pitches. My hearing was perfect. No tinnitus, no dips in any frequency range. I pulled up a spectrogram of the room's ambient noise. There was nothing there. Just the low-end signature of my computer's fan and the faint rumble of traffic from the highway a mile away. The pink noise was unrecordable. It existed only in the space between the microphone and the mind. This, I told myself, was stress. I'd just come off a brutal crunch period for a video game project, weeks of 14-hour days spent manipulating the sound of fictional explosions and alien heartbeats. Auditory fatigue. A phantom sensation born of burnout. I prescribed myself a week of relative silence. The silence, however, was no longer silent. The hum was in my apartment. Fainter than at verdure, but present. A constant, low-level SHH that clung to the quiet moments. It was maddening. I started leaving a fan on just to mask it, a sound I could identify and control. A few days later, I was on my balcony, nursing a coffee and trying to read. My downstairs neighbor, Sarah, was on hers. She was a yoga instructor, perpetually clad in Lululemon, usually flowing through a sun salutation or talking animatedly on her phone. But today, she was just standing there. Perfectly still. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted back, a small, beatific smile on her lips. She wasn't meditating, not in any way I recognized. Her posture was too passive. She was, listening. "Morning, Sarah," I called down. Her eyes fluttered open, but they seemed to take a moment to focus on me. "Oh. Hey, Alex. It's a beautiful day." "It is. Everything all right?" "More than all right," she breathed, her voice soft and airy. "Just taking a moment. Finding my center in the city's resonance." My blood ran cold. The city's resonance. It was the same kind of placid, new age nonsense Kai had offered at the grocery store. It was a script. "What resonance is that?" I pushed, trying to keep my voice casual. She smiled that same serene, unnerving smile. "You know. The hum. It's so calming. It washes everything else away." She closed her eyes again, swaying slightly, lost to it. I went back inside, the words echoing in my head. It washes everything else away. The unsettling mundane. That's what it was. The world hadn't changed, not really. The buses still ran on time, the coffee was still overpriced, the sky was still a familiar Pacific Northwest gray. But a new layer had been applied, a subtle audio filter that only I seemed to find horrifying. The next Monday, I went to my co-working space, a converted warehouse in Fremont that catered to creative freelancers. The place used to be a cacophony of quiet industry, the clatter of keyboards, the soft murmur of conference calls, the hiss of the espresso machine, and, most prominently, the bleed from dozens of different headphones playing dozens of different genres of music. Today, it was quiet. Terribly quiet. The keyboard still clacked, but in a strange, uniform rhythm. The usual chatter was gone. And everyone, I mean everyone, was wearing headphones. Big, expensive, noise-canceling headphones. The kind I wore when I was mastering a track. But as I walked past my usual desk, I glanced at the laptop of the graphic designer next to me. Her Spotify was closed. Her iTunes was inactive. She was just sitting there, staring intently at her screen, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Wearing headphones to listen to nothing. I sat down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the steady, intrusive hum in my own ears. I put on my own headphones and queued up a familiar album, turning it up louder than was probably safe. I needed to drown it out. I looked around the room. A sea of people, isolated in their own little bubbles of pink noise, their faces smooth and untroubled. I saw Mark, a writer who was usually a ball of nervous energy, his leg bouncing, his face a mask of anxiety. Today, he was perfectly still, his posture relaxed, his expression one of calm concentration. I saw Chloe, a web developer who loved death metal, her head normally banging subtly to some unheard blast beat. Today, she sat like a statue, her fingers gliding over her code. I felt a creeping sense of vertigo. Was I the one who was wrong? Was this some new productivity hack I'd missed? A biohack for the tech-addled brain? Was the pink noise a feature, not a bug? I pulled off my headphones. The hum rushed back in, filling the space. I packed my bag. "Leaving so soon, Alex?" It was the community manager, a relentlessly cheerful woman named Brenda. "Yeah, I can't focus today," I said. The lie tasted like ash. Brenda gave me that smile. The same one as Kai, the same one as Sarah. Placid. Empty. Understanding. You should try just listening, she said, gesturing to her own wireless earbuds. It really clears the cobwebs out. It's better than music. I mumbled an excuse and left, walking out into the gray Seattle afternoon. The hum seemed louder out here, a constant companion. I looked at the people on the street. A man in a suit waiting for the bus, eyes closed. A woman jogging along the canal, no earbuds, a faint, focused smile on her face. A group of students on a bench, not talking, not looking at their phones, just sitting together in shared, humming silence. The contagion wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was a whisper. A quiet, insidious hush that was falling over my city. And I was the only one who seemed to want to scream. The first phase of my private apocalypse wasn't about survival. It was about trying to convince myself that I wasn't already insane. It was about fighting the terrifying, seductive pull of the quiet, of the peace that came from giving in and just listening. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The next few weeks were a slow descent. My world, once a rich tapestry of sound, was flattening into a monochrome hiss. I started a journal, not of thoughts or feelings, but of acoustics. A logbook of my own sanity. October 17th, location, Public Library, Ballard Branch. Intensity, 4 out of 10. Notes, the hum is weakest in the older sections, surrounded by paper books. Strongest near the computer terminals and the new digital media hub. Watched a man sit at a terminal for an hour. Screen was off. He had headphones on. He looked blissful. October 22nd. Location, my apartment. Intensity, 3 out of 10, with fan on, 5 out of 10, in silence. Notes, it's getting stronger here. Or maybe I'm just more attuned to it. Sarah hasn't played music in 3 weeks. Saw her through the window last night, standing in her living room in the dark for 2 hours. Just listening. October 25th, location, Link Light Rail, heading downtown. Intensity, 8 out of 10. Notes, the noise is directly correlated with proximity to the new 5G towers and the smart transit pylons. The carriage was full. No one was talking. No one was reading. Just a car full of people, swaying with the motion of the train, their eyes distant. The silence was louder than any noise I've ever heard. My work suffered. How can you design the sound of a roaring dragon when the very concept of a roar felt like it was being sandpapered out of existence by a constant, formless hum? My clients complained my mixes were flat, lacking dynamism. I told them I was having equipment trouble. The truth was, I was having reality trouble. My isolation became a physical thing, a bubble of static I carried with me. The final nail in that coffin was Ben. Ben was my oldest friend, a senior software engineer at a sprawling tech campus in Redmond. He was a man of logic, of systems, of debugging the universe. If anyone could help me rationalize this, it was him. We met for a beer at our old haunt, a noisy, sticky-floored bar that I hoped would be immune. It wasn't. The hum was there, a low-frequency pressure beneath the jukebox and the laughter. "You look like hell, man," Ben said, sliding a pint of IPA across the table to me. "I feel like hell," I admitted. "Ben, I have to ask you something weird." I laid it all out. The hum, the people, the blank-eyed serenity. I tried to sound clinical, like I was describing a technical problem. I watched his face for any sign of recognition, of shared experience. He just looked concerned. "Tinnitus, maybe," he offered, ever the diagnostician. "You work with audio all day. You could have damaged your ears." I had them checked. Perfect hearing. Better than perfect, according to the audiologist. Okay, so, auditory pareidolia. Your brain is stressed, it's creating a pattern out of random noise. Like seeing faces in clouds. It's not in my head, Ben. Other people hear it. They just like it. He sighed, taking a long drink of his beer. Alex, everyone's stressed. The world's a mess. Maybe people are just finding new ways to zone out. A sort of mass meditation thing. This isn't meditation, I insisted, my voice rising. It's erasure. He gave me a look, the one that said he thought I was spiraling. In a last-ditch effort, I pulled out my phone and a pair of high-fidelity earbuds. I had spent hours in my studio synthesizing a pink noise signal that precisely matched the frequency and timbre of the hum. Put these on, I said. Tell me if this sound is familiar. He sighed. But obliged. He slipped the earbuds in. I watched his face. For a second, nothing. Then, his brow furrowed in concentration. And then, it cleared. A look of recognition dawned, followed by a wave of calm. He took the earbuds out, a slow smile spreading across his face. Oh, yeah, he said, his voice softer, smoother. Just like Kai's. Just like Sarah's. That's the new network resonance. They rolled it out across the campus data infrastructure last month. I stared at him, my own pint forgotten. The what? The network resonance. It's some kind of ambient signal piggybacking on the 5G and fiber optic grid. Supposed to leverage quantum harmonic principles to reduce cognitive load and increase productivity. He shrugged, taking another sip of beer. I thought it was bullshit marketing speak, but honestly, it works. My whole team's coding output is up 30%. Less stress, less distraction. It's calming, isn't it? That was it. That was the moment my friend was lost to me. It wasn't that he denied the sound, it was that he had a name for it. A corporate, sanitized, horrifyingly logical name. He heard it, he accepted it, and he was grateful for it. He was already on the other side. Calming? I whispered. Ben, it feels like my brain is being scraped out with a spoon. He just shook his head, that placid smile fixed on his face. You're fighting it, man. You just need to let go. I left him there, sitting in the noisy bar, an island of perfect, humming calm. My best friend was gone, and he didn't even know it. The isolation was no longer a feeling, it was a fact. I was a man speaking a dead language in a world that had forgotten it ever existed. My research became an obsession. I scoured the dark corners of the internet, searching for network resonance, auditory pacification, urban hum. Most of it was conspiracy nonsense, chemtrails and lizard people. But hidden in the noise, I found fragments. A deleted post on a biohacking forum. Anyone in the Seattle area noticed the new ambiance? It's not tinnitus. It's a signal. It's changing people. A frantic thread on a Reddit sub for audio engineers, describing the exact frequency range I was hearing, which was quickly brigaded by accounts calling the original poster schizophrenic before the entire thread was removed by moderators. The posters had names: Cassandra_7, Signal to Noise, Echo Chamber. I tried to message them. No reply. Their accounts were dormant or deleted. Ghosts. And then I started noticing the symbol. It was subtle at first. A small, stenciled logo on the side of a new, gray utility box installed on my street corner. It was a simple, elegant design, a perfect circle with a single, clean sine wave passing through the middle. A stylized representation of a sound wave in an enclosed space. A few days later, I saw it again, this time on a glossy pamphlet tucked under my door. Ethelred, Urban Wellness Solutions. Harmonize your life. Harmonize your city. The pamphlet was full of meaningless corporate jargon. Synergistic environmental integration. Passive cognitive enhancement. Proactive atmospheric design. It promised a future of effortless calm and focus, a city free from the stresses of modern life. It was all couched in the language of wellness and mindfulness, but beneath it, I felt the cold, hard certainty of a threat. Ethelred. The name sounded ancient, regal, completely at odds with its sterile, modern branding. I started seeing the logo everywhere. A faint watermark on the bottom of a memo at the co-working space. A small sticker on the new smart streetlights that flickered in odd, non-random patterns at night. A lapel pin on a city council member I saw giving a press conference on the local news. Ethelred wasn't just a company. It was the architect of my silent prison. The hum wasn't a byproduct of their technology, it was the product itself. And the secondary mystery of this wellness startup was no mystery at all. It was the source. It was the name of the contagion. My paranoia deepened, twisting into a kind of grim purpose. I wasn't just going crazy. I was a witness. My apartment became my command center. I lined one of the walls with corkboard, pinning up maps of the city, marking the locations of the new utility boxes, the 5G towers, the places where the hum felt strongest. I printed out the Ethelred logo, the pamphlet, screenshots of the deleted forum posts. It looked like the frantic collage of a madman, and maybe it was. But it was also a map of the new reality. One evening, I tried to show Ben my research. I invited him over, hoping some part of the old, logical, skeptical Ben was still in there. He walked into my apartment, looked at my wall of madness, and his expression didn't change. No shock, no concern. Just that placid, frictionless calm. "Wow, Alex," he said, his voice a soothing monotone. "This is a very involved project." "It's not a project, Ben. It's what's happening. Ethelred is doing this." He walked over to the board and gently touched the printout of the logo. "Ethelred is a good company," he said, as if reciting a memorized fact. "They're making things better. More efficient. They're making people into zombies." I yelled, my voice cracking. He turned to me, his eyes empty of any real emotion. "You seem very agitated, Alex. You know, if you just relaxed and listened to the resonance, you'd feel so much better. Why are you causing yourself so much stress?" He wasn't my friend anymore. He was a mouthpiece. An NPC. I asked him to leave. He did, without argument, without any emotion at all. Just a calm, "Okay, Alex. I hope you find some peace." As the door clicked shut, leaving me alone with my wall of evidence, the hum seemed to swell in the silence. It felt like it was mocking me. I was the only sane man left, and in a world that had chosen a quiet, comfortable madness, that made me the craziest one of all. My journey wasn't about finding answers anymore. It was about surviving the answer I'd already found. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of Ethelred was like finding the architect's name on the blueprint of your prison cell. It didn't get me out, but it gave my despair a target. My frantic online searches became surgical strikes. I learned how to use VPNs, to browse through Tor, to dig into cached web pages and archived corporate filings. Ethelred presented itself as a wellness startup, but its roots were in darker soil, DARPA grants, behavioral psychology research, and venture capital from firms known for their ruthless, data-driven approach to social engineering. I found what I was looking for on a forgotten server belonging to a disgruntled ex-contractor. It was a single, heavily redacted internal presentation from 3 years ago. The title alone made my skin crawl: Project Nightingale, Ambient Neural Pacification via Quantum Resonance Grid. Most of the document was blacked out, but fragments remained, like bones sticking out of the mud. Bypass the conscious critical faculty. Reduction of amygdala-driven anxiety responses by an average of 82% in trial subjects. Fosters a state of non-critical, passive contentment, ideal for increasing efficiency and social cohesion. Signal is adaptive, algorithmically adjusting to individual neural patterns to maximize cognitive harmonization. This was it. The smoking gun. The pink noise, the hum, the resonance, it wasn't a sound. It was a tool. A broadcasted social tranquilizer designed to sand down the sharp edges of human personality, anxiety, passion, anger, dissent, leaving behind a smooth, compliant, and terrifyingly efficient workforce. They called it cognitive harmonization. I called it soul death. The world outside my window became a living testament to their success. The changes, once subtle, were now stark and undeniable. I saw it in the traffic, which now flowed with an eerie, computer-perfect precision. No more road rage, no more impatient honking. Just a silent, orderly procession of vehicles. I saw it at a coffee shop where a barista spilled a tray of scalding hot drinks. There was no shouting, no panic. The customers who were splashed simply looked down at their stained clothes with mild curiosity. The barista calmly got a mop. The manager placidly filled out an incident report. The event was processed, not experienced. The raw, messy, unpredictable static of human interaction had been filtered out, replaced by the clean, sterile hum of the signal. Even art was dying. The local music venues, once vibrant hubs of noise and sweat, were closing down, one by one, citing lack of interest. The street art that used to color the city's walls was fading, not painted over, but simply, not refreshed. Why create, why express, why scream into the void when the void was purring back at you with such a soothing, constant lullaby? My only hope lay with the ghosts, the deleted forum users. Cassandra_7 was my focus. Her posts had been the most articulate, the most technically knowledgeable. She'd mentioned specific audio concepts, things only an engineer would know. I cross-referenced her username with old audio engineering forums, with university alumni databases, with anything I could find. It took me a week of sleepless nights, but I finally got a hit. A user with a similar handle had been active on a niche acoustics message board a decade ago. Her name was Lena. Lena Petrova. A former audio engineer for a major recording studio who had dropped off the map about 5 years ago, right around the time Ethelred was founded. A property search gave me an address. Not in the city, but far out in the rural sprawl of Snohomish County, in an older, unincorporated area untouched by the recent wave of smart development. An analog island in a digital sea. Getting there was an act of faith. I drove my old, pre-smart tech car, the engine a comforting, chaotic rumble. The further I got from Seattle's dense network, the more the pink noise in my head seemed to recede, like a tide going out. For the first time in months, I could hear the distinct sound of my tires on the pavement, the whisper of the wind, the cry of a distant bird. The world regained its texture. It was so beautiful it made me want to weep. Lena's house was a small, unassuming rambler, surrounded by a thicket of overgrown fir trees. The windows were covered with what looked like aluminum foil. A mess of strange, ugly antennas bristled from the roof. It was the house of a paranoid recluse, and for the first time, paranoia looked like sanity. I knocked. A voice, sharp and rough, came through a metal speaker box next to the door. "Go away. Lena Petrova." I shouted at the box. "My name is Alex. I need to talk to you about Ethelred. About the signal." Silence. Then, a series of loud, metallic clanks. The door creaked open a few inches, held by a chain. A pair of sharp, intelligent eyes peered out at me from the darkness within. "How did you find me?" Cassandra_7, I said. The chain slid back. The door opened. "Get in. Quickly." The inside of her house was a fortress of organized chaos. Wires snaked across the floor. Oscilloscopes and spectrum analyzers blinked on workbenches. The walls weren't just foiled, they were lined with thick, sound-dampening acoustic foam. The air was still and blessedly, perfectly, silent. The absence of the hum was a physical presence. It felt like the pressure in my ears had finally equalized. Lena was a woman in her late 50s, with short gray hair and an intensity that felt like a coiled spring. She watched me with a hawk-like suspicion. "You're not one of them," she stated, not a question. "Your eyes are wrong. Too much noise in them." She showed me her setup. She hadn't just been hiding, she'd been fighting. "It's not just pink noise," she explained, pointing to a complex, shifting waveform on one of her monitors. "That was just version 1.0. What they're broadcasting now is an adaptive bioresonant frequency. It listens. It analyzes the ambient brainwaves of the population and adjusts its own harmonic structure to create the most efficient pacification signal. It learns." She had been tracking it since its earliest tests, when it was just a localized phenomenon around Ethelred's corporate headquarters. She had tried to warn people, but she was dismissed as a crank, a conspiracy theorist. So she went dark, creating her own zone of silence, a tiny pocket of reality where the old rules still applied. Our alliance was born of shared desperation. It was tense, fraught with her paranoia and my frayed nerves. She didn't trust me not to be a vector for the signal, not to carry its influence into her sanctuary. I didn't blame her. I barely trusted my own mind anymore. We worked together, pooling our knowledge. My recent observations from inside the city, her technical analysis from the outside. The Ethelred logo, she discovered, wasn't just branding. The specific curve of the sine wave was a diagram of the signal's core harmonic. The circle represented its all-encompassing, closed-loop nature. It was a mission statement hidden in plain sight. The stakes escalated when Ben showed up at my apartment. Not my real apartment, but my old one, which I had quietly abandoned. I had kept the lease, and I had a remote camera feed trained on the door. I watched on Lena's monitor as Ben, accompanied by two other men in simple, clean-cut Ethelred uniforms, knocked on the door. They weren't aggressive. They just stood there, patient, calm. They knocked once every 10 minutes for 3 hours. Their job wasn't to break the door down, it was to wait. An algorithm of patience. They were there to bring a stray node back into the network. Me. "They're not police," Lena murmured, watching the screen. "They're technicians." The true horror of the situation settled in. Ethelred didn't need violence. Violence was inefficient, messy. It created fear and resistance. Their weapon was silence, their tool was peace. How do you fight an enemy that only wants to calm you down? How do you wage a war against tranquility? Lena believed she had an answer. Not a weapon, but a countermeasure. She led me to her garage, which was dominated by a large, ugly machine made of salvaged speaker magnets, copper coils, and satellite dishes, all wired to a powerful signal generator. "It can't destroy the signal," she said, her hand resting on the machine's metal frame. "The grid is too vast, too powerful. But it might be able to create a null zone. A bubble of pure, chaotic, analog silence. A counter-frequency that could, for a few moments, deafen the nightingale." Our target was obvious. Ethelred's primary broadcasting hub, which their website proudly advertised as a gift to the city, a towering, twisted metal sculpture in the center of the newly renovated downtown park. The Ethelred beacon, a piece of public art that was, in reality, the central antenna for the entire system. The plan was insane, suicidal. But as I looked at the live feed of the calm, patient men still waiting outside my old apartment, I knew we had no other choice. We couldn't hide forever. The only way out was to face the silence and make a sound of our own, no matter how dissonant or terrifying it might be. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The night we chose was overcast, a typical Seattle sky that bled the light from the city, leaving behind a smear of gray and neon. Lena's counter-frequency emitter, which she grimly nicknamed the Howler, was broken down into 3 heavy, awkward cases. Our mission was a ghost story in reverse. We weren't trying to prove the haunting, we were trying to perform the exorcism. Driving back into the city was a physical shock. As we crossed the bridge, the pink noise flooded back in, not just as a sound, but as a pressure, a thick, syrupy weight on my consciousness. It was worse than I remembered, more seductive. A siren song whispering directly to my synapses, promising an end to the fear that was coiling in my gut. It's okay. Let go. Be calm. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, focusing on the chaotic rattle of the old truck's engine, a lifeline to a messier, freer reality. It's trying to tune you, Lena said from the passenger seat, her eyes shut tight. Don't let it find your frequency. Think about something complex. A math problem. A painful memory. I thought about my father's funeral. The memory was a jagged shard of grief and confusion. And for the first time in my life, I was grateful for the pain. It was mine. It was real. The downtown park was transformed. It used to be a somewhat neglected patch of green, a place for office workers to eat sad lunches. Now it was pristine, manicured. And it was full of people. Hundreds of them. It was nearly midnight, but they were gathered on the lawns, not for a concert or a protest, but in silent congregation. Some were standing, some were sitting, but all of them faced the sculpture in the center of the park. The Ethelred beacon was a 100-foot-tall monstrosity of polished steel, twisting towards the sky like a strand of metallic DNA. It didn't hum with power, it was utterly silent, yet the noise emanated from it in palpable waves. The air around it felt thick, viscous. The faces of the people bathed in its invisible glow were slack with a kind of ecstatic vacancy. They were charging themselves, drinking in the signal. My part of the plan was diversion. Lena, with her technical knowledge, had to assemble and activate the howler. I had to create a window for her to do it. We found a utility shed near the edge of the park. Lena slipped inside with the cases while I walked towards the crowd. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, animal rhythm completely at odds with the placid atmosphere. I walked past the silent figures. No one looked at me. I was an anomaly, a glitch in their serene matrix. The closer I got to the beacon, the more the noise burrowed into my skull. The edges of my vision started to soften. The sharp spike of my anxiety was being gently, lovingly smoothed away. The thought of my father's funeral was blurring, its painful edges dissolving into a warm, comfortable fog. It was terrifyingly pleasant. I pulled a small, battery-powered bullhorn from my jacket, a relic I'd bought from a surplus store. It felt crude, profane in this temple of quiet. I took a deep breath, fighting back the seductive calm. Hey! I screamed into the bullhorn. The sound was obscene. A raw, distorted blast of pure human noise. It ripped through the placid air. For a moment, there was no reaction. The crowd was a statue garden. Then, slowly, heads began to turn. Not in anger or alarm, but with a slow, bovine curiosity. They looked at me as if I were a strange weather phenomenon. A few of them, Ethelred's quiet guardians in their simple gray uniforms, began to walk towards me. Not running. Just walking. Calmly. Efficiently. I kept shouting, spouting nonsense, quoting old movie lines, singing off-key, anything to create a dissonant ripple in their placid pond. It was the most important performance of my life. The technicians were getting closer, their expressions not menacing, just blankly purposeful. They were going to correct the error. They were going to make me quiet. Then, it happened. A low, guttural groan emanated from the utility shed, quickly rising in pitch and complexity. It wasn't a single tone, it was 1,000 tones at once, a chaotic, ugly swarm of sound. The howler was active. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The pink noise vanished. It didn't fade, it was cancelled out, punched through by Lena's chaotic signal. A hole was torn in the fabric of the soundscape. And into that hole, reality came rushing back. For one perfect, horrifying moment, there was pure, absolute silence. A silence so profound it was a physical blow. The world, for the first time in years for these people, was unfiltered. And then the screaming started. It wasn't a cry of anger or fear, but of pure, unadulterated psychic shock. It was the sound of 1,000 anesthetized minds waking up on the operating table. The sudden, brutal return of unfiltered sensory input, the random, anxious thoughts, the background hum of 1 billion tiny worries, the sharp sting of memory, the sheer, deafening noise of an untranquilized consciousness, was too much. A man clawed at his own face, staring at his hands as if they were alien things. A woman curled into a fetal position, weeping uncontrollably. People looked at the strangers next to them not with placid acceptance, but with stark, animal terror. The harmonized consciousness had fractured. And the individuals left behind were raw, terrified children, abandoned in the wreckage of their own minds. The Ethelred technicians faltered. They clutched their heads, their calm expressions shattering into masks of confusion and pain. They were just as lost as everyone else. In the chaos, Lena grabbed my arm, her face pale and grim. "It worked," she rasped. "Now we run." We fled, swallowed by the darkness at the edge of the park as the symphony of human misery swelled behind us. My act of noise had been a firecracker, Lena's act of silence had been a bomb. We didn't stop until we were miles away, back in the analog safety of her house. We watched the news reports on an old television. The official story was a mass panic attack, a freak psychological event, likely caused by an unidentified environmental toxin. Ethelred, in a public statement, offered its resources to help the city heal, promising to reinforce its urban wellness grid to prevent such a traumatic event from ever happening again. They weren't defeated. We had shown them a weakness, and they would patch it. The null zone we created had collapsed within minutes as the system, as Lena predicted, adapted and overpowered our device. The pink noise had returned to the city, stronger now, more soothing, a gentle balm for the wounds we had inflicted. We hadn't saved them. We had only shown them the bars of their cage, and they had begged to be let back inside. The cure was more brutal than the disease. Lena is gone now. She packed her essentials, destroyed the howler, and drove north, heading for the vast, unnetworked wilderness of the Yukon. She told me to come, but I couldn't. This was my city. These were my people, my ghosts. So now I remain. A ghost myself, walking through the perfectly functioning machine. The hum is stronger than ever, a constant, loving pressure. But I am no longer its victim. Lena, before she left, built me a final gift, a pair of custom-molded earplugs. They don't block sound. They contain a tiny, passive analog filter, a sliver of crystal and wire tuned to the precise core frequency of the Ethelred signal, subtly scrambling it, creating just enough internal noise to keep my mind my own. They allow me to exist in the quiet, but not be consumed by it. I walk the clean, orderly streets. The people glide past me, serene and empty, their faces untroubled. I am utterly, completely alone. But sometimes, in a crowded cafe or on a packed train, I make eye contact with a stranger. And for a fraction of a second, I see a flicker. A ghost of a ghost. A brief, terrifying moment of confusion in their eyes, a spark of the old, messy, chaotic static of selfhood, before their expression goes slack and their gaze drifts away, pulled back under by the quiet, constant, loving hum. The contagion won. It won with a whisper, with a promise of peace. I didn't stop it. I don't know if anyone can. All I can do now is bear witness. I am the keeper of a memory, the last echo of a world that no one else remembers being loud. And I listen, always, for other echoes in the silence. The word that slipped away. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began, as so many mundane apocalypses do, in a pub. The King's Head, specifically. A proper Manchester pub, all dark wood, polished brass, and the lingering ghost of a century's worth of spilt ale. It was Tuesday, which meant it was trivia night. Our team, Me, my sister Chloe, and our mates Dave and Gaz, was called Quizzy Rascals. We were perpetually second place. The air was thick with the warm fug of bodies, beer, and the sizzling threat of a deep fryer. The quizmaster, a portly man named Barry with a voice like gravel in a cement mixer, was in his element. "All right, you lot," he boomed into the crackling microphone. Round 3. History and Times. For a pint on the house, what is the first month of the Gregorian calendar? A low groan went through the room. The easy ones were always the hardest to trust. I scribbled January on our answer slip without a second thought. Dave, a man whose brain was 90% football stats and 10% pork pie recipes, nodded sagely. Got to be, in it. But when Barry started reading the answers, a strange ripple went through the room. Team after team had written some variation of the same thing. The cold start one. The New Year month. After the big party time. Barry squinted at the slips. Bit of a running joke tonight, eh? Very funny. Anyone actually get it? I raised our slip. We did. January. Barry stared at me. He didn't smile. A flicker of something, confusion, irritation, crossed his face. Don't be a smart arse, Liam. What's the proper answer? That is the proper answer, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. Chloe nudged me under the table. Leave it, our kid. He's having a laugh. But he wasn't. No one was. I looked around. Blank faces. Genuinely blank. It was as if I'd shouted a nonsense word. Barry, flustered, just grunted and moved on. The point goes to, no one. Let's try another. The shape with 3 sides is called a. I didn't even write it down. I knew what would happen. And it did. The pointy shape. 3-corner thingy. Our answer, triangle, was met with the same baffled silence. This time, even my own team looked at me funny. Where'd you pull that from? Gaz asked, genuinely curious. Some posh word? It's not a posh word, Gaz. It's the word. For a shape. With 3 sides. Yeah, a pointy shape, he said, as if I were the one being dense. Chloe shot me a look, the one that said, don't make a scene. I subsided, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The rest of the night passed in a blur of this strange, new pigeon. The capital of France was the Big Tower City. The Beatles were the 4 lads from Liverpool. It was like the world had been given a factory reset, reverting to its most basic, functional descriptions. I felt dizzy. I'm a freelance copy editor. Words are my trade, my tools, the very architecture of my world. I spend my days rearranging them, polishing them, ensuring their precision. My flat, a small 2-bed in a red brick terrace in Chorlton, is a testament to this order. Books are alphabetized by author. Spices are arranged by cuisine. My life runs on the reassuring logic of a well-structured sentence. When I got home, the rain had started, a classic Manchester drizzle that slicked the streets and made the sodium orange of the streetlights bleed across the pavement. I bypassed the kettle and poured a large whiskey. I took out the small, black moleskine notebook I use for work. On the first clean page, I wrote. January, the cold start one. Triangle, the pointy shape. It looked insane. A joke I wasn't in on. Mass hysteria. Some weird, viral meme that had infected everyone but me. I'd had a stressful week, chasing an invoice from a particularly flaky publisher. Maybe I was just overtired. My brain was misfiring, turning a pub gag into a conspiracy. I downed the whiskey, the burn a welcome distraction, and decided to forget it. The next day, the feeling of wrongness clung to me like the damp. I was proofing a dense academic text on urban regeneration. The sentence read, the committee will convene on the second Monday of the month. I stared at the word Monday. It felt alien. Heavy and meaningless on the page, like a fossil from a forgotten language. I shook my head, rubbing my eyes. It was just a word. A bog standard, universally understood word. I went out for milk. Mr. Henderson, who had run the corner shop since before I was born, was bagging up some groceries for Mrs. Higgins from number 42. "And don't forget your house key," she said, pointing to the counter. Mr. Henderson smiled, a gentle, vacant smile. "Your door opener thingy. Of course, love. Wouldn't want you stuck outside." Mrs. Higgins didn't blink. She just picked up the key. Silly me. "Thanks, Stan. Key, door opener thingy." My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed my milk, paid with the exact change to avoid conversation, and hurried home. The walk, usually a 2-minute nothing, felt like a gauntlet. The world was the same, the gray sky, the smell of wet tarmac, the distant wail of a siren, but the soundtrack was off. The familiar hum of language had been replaced by a clumsy, out-of-tune improvisation. That evening, Chloe called. Her voice was a warm, familiar comfort. "You all right, our kid?" she asked. "You went a bit weird last night." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." "Well, don't forget it's the special day for the man who raised us on Sunday." I froze, the phone slick in my hand. "The what?" "You know. Him. The one who was married to Mom." You're, her voice trailed off, a note of frustration creeping in. "Oh, you know. We're going for a meal." My blood ran cold. I knew what she was trying to say. But the word was gone. Not just for her, but in the space between us. It was a hole. A vacuum where a fundamental concept used to be. "You mean Dad?" I whispered the word, feeling a strange sense of transgression, like I was uttering a blasphemy. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Chloe's laugh, brittle and confused. "Dad? What a funny sound. Don't be weird, Liam. I'll see you Sunday. We'll celebrate him." She hung up. I stood in the silence of my flat, the dial tone a monotonous drone in my ear. I walked over to my desk and opened the Moleskine. My hand was shaking so badly it took me 3 attempts to write it down. The ink bled into the paper, a dark, spreading stain. Monday, the day after the weekend one. Key, door opener thingy. And then, on a new line, the one that made me feel like I was going to be sick. Father, the man who raised us. I closed the notebook. I was suddenly, desperately, scared to open it again. What other words, what other essential pieces of my world, were already written inside? What pieces of me were on the verge of slipping away? I looked out of my window at the quiet, rain-slicked street. It all looked so normal. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wasn't. A silent plague was spreading through the syllables and syntax of my city. A quiet contagion of the mind. And I seemed to be the only one who remembered the words that were being lost. For the next few weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. I was an archivist of a dying language. My Moleskine was my constant companion, its pages filling with these linguistic ghosts. Book, the story thing with pages. Sun, the big hot sky light. Blue, the color of the high-up place. History, the long-ago time story. Love, that really, really good feeling you get for someone. The descriptions were becoming more and more juvenile, more simplistic. It was a regression. The world was unlearning itself, one word at a time. Work became a nightmare. I'd send back edits, reinserting the correct terminology, gentrification, socioeconomic, infrastructure, only to have the client email me back, confused. What do these fancy sounds mean? Can you just use the simple tellings? My income began to dry up. I tried to adapt. I learned to speak the new language, the simple telling. It was exhausting, like constantly translating in my own head. Ordering a coffee became a game of charades. I'll have the hot brown wake-up drink. With the white cow stuff in it. No sweetie bits. The baristas, their faces placid and uncurious, understood perfectly. I was the one who felt like a foreigner. The most unnerving part was the lack of panic. No one else noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care. The loss was seamless. A word would vanish from the collective consciousness, and the clumsy, descriptive placeholder would instantly take its root, accepted by everyone as if it had always been that way. There was no struggle, no moment of, wait, what's that word again? There was just, a smooth, placid transition. It was like watching a photograph fade, but everyone else insisted the colors were as vibrant as ever. I was utterly, profoundly alone. My world hadn't ended with a bang, but with a quiet, collective, oh, what was that word again? Never mind. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The isolation became a physical presence, a weight in my chest. Conversations were minefields. Every sentence I constructed felt like a deliberate act of rebellion, and every simple, broken phrase I received in return was a reminder of my solitude. My walks around the neighborhood turned into observational field trips. I'd sit on a bench in the local park and just listen. The little tree jumpers are fast today, a mother would say to her child, pointing at a squirrel. Can I go on the up and down thingy? The child would reply, pointing at the seesaw. Squirrel, little tree jumper. Seesaw, up and down thingy. My notebook was getting full. I bought another. The planned meal for the man who raised us, was excruciating. We went to a carvery just outside the city center. Chloe was there, looking pretty in a new dress, the color of the fire engine thing. Our aunts and uncles were there too. The conversation was a sludge of simple tellings. They talked about their jobs, the money-getting place, the weather, the sky water, and their health, the body feeling. I tried. God, I tried. I attempted to tell an anecdote about a holiday Dad and I had taken to Wales. Do you remember, Chloe? When we went to that big hill place? Dad insisted we climb it. Snowdon, it was called. Blank stares. Not just from Chloe, but from everyone. The what? My uncle asked. Snowdon, I repeated, the word feeling ridiculous and ornate in my mouth. The mountain. My aunt patted my hand. Such a head for the fancy sounds you've got, Liam. Our Chloe says you work with the page story things. Very clever. Chloe looked at me with an expression of genuine pity, as if I were a confused child. He means the big walk-up high ground, love. The one with the train for the people who don't like the legwork. She remembered the event. The details were there, the train, the climb, the exertion. But the names, the anchors of the memory, were gone. Snowdon. Mountain. Wales. All of it, erased. Replaced by a crude sketch of the experience. We were a family built on a shared history, but the language of that history was being deleted, chapter by chapter. I looked at the man at the head of the table, my father, carving a slice of the big animal meat. He caught my eye and smiled, a warm, simple smile. He didn't know his name was gone. He didn't know he was a ghost at his own feast. I excused myself, went to the gents, and was sick in the sink. My attempts to find answers were pathetic. I searched online for hours, typing increasingly desperate queries. Mass linguistic degradation. Collective conceptual amnesia. Forgetting common nouns. The results were all academic papers on aphasia in stroke victims, articles about early onset dementia, and forums for people who were convinced they'd slipped into a parallel universe where the Berenstain Bears were spelled differently. Nothing fit the scale, the quiet, placid totality of what was happening. This led me to a new line of inquiry, a potential red herring that quickly became an obsession. I started noticing a sound. It was faint, on the very edge of hearing, a low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. I could only hear it in the dead of night, when the city held its breath. A deep, resonant thrum, like a giant engine idling miles below the earth. At first, I thought it was tinnitus, a symptom of my own fraying mind. But then I noticed things. I saw a cat on a garden wall, its head cocked, its ears twitching in the direction of the old, derelict Fairfax mill at the edge of the industrial estate. I saw a line of pigeons on a telephone wire, all perfectly still, all facing the mill. The mill was a relic of Manchester's industrial past, a vast brick cathedral of forgotten commerce. Its windows were smashed, its brickwork stained black with a century of soot. It had been silent for 50 years. But the hum felt like it was coming from there. I started taking walks out to the perimeter fence. The hum was stronger there, a tangible vibration that I could feel in the soles of my shoes. It was a simple, monotonous sound. A single, unending note. And the people I saw in the streets nearby seemed different. More placid. Their conversations were even more stripped down than in my neighborhood. They moved slowly, their faces empty of anxiety or ambition. They were just existing. Drawn to the sound. One afternoon, I tried to talk to one of them, an old man sitting on a bench staring at the mill's imposing clock tower. "Afternoon," I said. He turned his head slowly. "The time of day is after the middle bit." "Right. I was just wondering, do you hear that sound? That humming?" He smiled, a blissful, empty smile. "It's the quiet song. The one that makes things simple. The quiet song." A chill that had nothing to do with the damp Manchester air snaked down my spine. He wasn't disturbed by it. He was comforted. The hum wasn't a side effect. It was the cause. I retreated, my heart pounding. This wasn't just memory loss. It was a replacement. The complex, chaotic, beautiful mess of human language and thought was being smoothed over, ironed out by this monotonous, all-consuming hum. The quiet song was making things simple by erasing everything that was complicated. My isolation was now twofold. I was in exile from the shared language of my species, and I was apparently the only one tormented by a sound that everyone else found soothing. I dug into local archives online, searching for anything about the Fairfax mill. Most of it was boring industrial records, cotton imports, loom patents, worker censuses. But then I found it. A digitized copy of a small local newspaper from 1888. The article was brief, a filler piece on the bottom of page 6. A curious malady in the mill quarter. It described a strange affliction among the workers at the Fairfax mill. They called it the blanking sickness. Sufferers would become listless, forgetful. They would lose words for common objects, referring to them in a childish and simplistic manner. The local physician dismissed it as a combination of overwork and poor nutrition. The mill owner, a Josiah Fairfax, refused to comment. The article ended on a strange note, mentioning that the afflicted workers seemed unusually placid, even joyful in their ignorance, and were often found humming a single, low note. The page ended there. The next day's edition was missing from the digital archive. It wasn't new. This had happened before. This wasn't a contagion spreading now, it was something waking up. Something that had been sleeping in the bones of the old mill. And its quiet, simple song was once again washing over the city, and I was trapped on a tiny island of memory, watching the tide of forgetting rise all around me. My little black notebooks felt less like an archive and more like a tombstone for a world that was already dead. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of the blanking sickness article galvanized me. The red herring had swum right into the main plot. I wasn't just going mad, I was rediscovering a forgotten horror. The hum from the mill wasn't just a sound, it was a broadcast. A signal that simplified reality. My investigation became my only purpose. I stopped trying to correct people, stopped mourning every lost word. I was a researcher now, and the Fairfax Mill was my subject. I spent days at the Manchester Central Library, losing myself in dusty archives and microfilm readers. The librarians, their faces increasingly placid, would help me find the old-time paper things and the picture rolls of the long ago. I found more whispers of the blanking sickness. A letter from a clergyman in 1889, complaining that his congregation was losing the words of the Lord's Prayer, replacing them with crude approximations. A physician's private journal describing his frustration with patients who could no longer name their own body parts, pointing instead to the head thinker, the food hole, or the leg movers. He noted their strange lack of distress. He also mentioned a persistent, low hum that seemed to emanate from the industrial quarter, a sound he worried was affecting his own concentration. His entries grew simpler, less clinical. The last one just said, "The low song is nice today." All is simple. The pattern was undeniable. This thing, whatever it was, ebbed and flowed. It had risen in the late 19th century and then, for some reason, receded. Now it was back. I needed an ally. Someone to confirm I wasn't just connecting unrelated dots, weaving a grand conspiracy from my own paranoia. My thoughts turned to a former university professor, a Dr. Alastair Finch, who taught a module on linguistic anthropology I'd taken. He was eccentric, obsessed with dead languages and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the language you speak shapes your reality. If anyone could understand the conceptual horror of what was happening, it was him. It took me a week to find him. He was retired, living in a cluttered Victorian house in Didsbury, a leafier, more academic part of the city. I found his number in an old university directory and called, my hands clammy. "Finch," a reedy voice answered. I stumbled through an explanation, trying not to sound like a lunatic. I talked about the pub quiz, the simple tellings, the blanking sickness. I expected him to hang up. Instead, there was a long, crackling silence. "The Fairfax Mill," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "It's active again, then." Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. You know about it?" "Know of it," he corrected, his old pedantic reflex still intact. "It's a local legend in certain circles. A ghost story for academics. The Manchester hum. A semantic plague. Most people dismiss it. I always wondered." He paused. "Bring your notebooks, Mr. Evans. Come and see me. And be careful. The simplicity is seductive." His house was a fortress of words. Books were stacked to the ceiling on every available surface. The air smelled of decaying paper and Earl Grey tea. Dr. Finch was a small, bird-like man with frantic eyes behind thick spectacles. He looked at my notebooks, his thin fingers tracing the words. "Incredible," he murmured. "The degradation is accelerating far faster than the 19th century accounts suggest. Look at the syntax simplification. It's not just nouns. Prepositions are vanishing. Conjunctions. The very glue of complex thought." He had a theory, one he'd pieced together from forgotten folklore and obscure texts. He didn't think the hum was technological or biological. He believed the mill had been built on a place where reality was thin. A weak spot. And the rhythmic, industrial drone of the looms in the 1800s had, by sheer accident, resonated at the exact frequency needed to exploit that weakness. "Language is the operating system of human consciousness, Liam," he explained, his eyes burning with intensity. "It allows us to process abstract thought, to plan, to remember, to create. What this hum does, is it introduces a virus into that OS. A rogue signal that erases complex code and replaces it with the simplest possible functions. It's not just erasing words, it's erasing the capacity for the thoughts those words represent. His theory was terrifying, but it made a horrifying kind of sense. It explained the placidity. Why would you feel ambition if you no longer had the word for future? Why would you feel grief if the concept of loss had been simplified to the not here feeling? But our alliance was to be short-lived. Over the next few days, as we worked together, I noticed a change in him. He would lose his train of thought mid-sentence. He started using the simple tellings, then catching himself, a look of sheer terror in his eyes. The hum was stronger than his intellect. His fortress of books was no defense. The last time I saw him, I arrived at his house to find the door ajar. The hum was palpable inside, seemingly amplified by the dense stacks of paper. Dr. Finch was sitting in his armchair, not reading, but staring at a page of an ancient Sumerian text. He was humming. The same low, monotonous note as the mill. "Dr. Finch?" I said, my voice trembling. He looked up at me, his eyes calm and empty. The frantic intelligence was gone. "The sounds are very old," he said, his voice flat. "They make the head place quiet. It's a good feeling." He had succumbed. My only ally was lost, absorbed into the quiet contagion. I backed out of the house, leaving him to his simple, quiet song. The sanctuary of knowledge had become just another node in the network. The escalation was no longer subtle. It was personal. Chloe had stopped answering my calls. I went to her flat, a modern new build near the canals. I used the door opener thingy she'd given me. The flat was neat, silent, except for the television, which was on but tuned to a dead channel, emitting a low hiss of static. And the hum. It was here, too. A low, resonant pulse coming from the television speaker. Chloe was on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket. She wasn't watching anything. She was just sitting. Listening. A faint, serene smile on her face. "Chloe," I said, my voice breaking. She turned to me, her movements slow, graceful. "Hello, the family man won. Brother, the family man won." I knelt in front of her. "Chloe, we have to get out of here. Out of the city. Something is wrong." She reached out and touched my cheek. Her hand was warm, but her touch was impersonal, like a nurse checking for a fever. "Wrong? No. Everything is simple now. No more head noise. Just the quiet song. It's so nice." The placid dismissal I had seen in strangers was now directed at me from the face of the person I loved most in the world. The horror of it was a physical blow. She wasn't a prisoner. She was a convert. I looked at her, at the empty serenity in her eyes, and I understood the true nature of the threat. This wasn't something you could fight. It wasn't an enemy you could defeat. It was an invitation. An offer of peace. The quiet song didn't take your mind by force, it seduced it with the promise of simplicity, of an end to anxiety, struggle, and pain. It offered to erase the beautiful, terrible complexity of being human and replace it with a simple, humming contentment. And as I sat there on the floor of her flat, the hum from the television washing over me, a terrifying thought entered my mind. For a fleeting second, just a microsecond, I understood the appeal. A world without worry. A world without grief. A world without the crushing weight of memory. It was the most terrifying, seductive thought I'd ever had. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. Desperation is a key that unlocks doors you shouldn't open. Leaving Dr. Finch to his humming and seeing Chloe lost in her static lullaby broke the last thread of my caution. There was no one left to help me, no one to even understand me. There was only the source. The mill. I went at night, under a starless, light-polluted sky. I cut through the perimeter fence with a pair of bolt cutters I bought from a hardware shop, the transaction a painful exercise in miming and simple telling. The hum was a physical force here, a pressure against my eardrums, a vibration in my bones. It felt like standing next to a colossal, silent bell that had just been struck. Getting inside the mill was easier than it should have been. A side door, its lock long rusted away, groaned open into a cavernous, dark space that smelled of decay, damp, and ozone. The air was thick with the hum, which seemed to coat every surface like a layer of dust. My torch beam cut a nervous path through the darkness, illuminating skeletal remains of machinery. Huge, silent looms stood in ranks like ancient monoliths. I walked through them, my footsteps echoing in the immense space. The hum grew stronger, pulling me towards the center of the building, towards what must have been the engine room. There was no physical confrontation. There was no monster, no cabal of villains, no alien machine with blinking lights. The horror was far more abstract, far more profound. The engine room was a vast, brick-lined cylinder that plunged down into the earth. In the center of the space, where a great steam engine would have once stood, there was nothing. And everything. It was a shimmer in the air. A distortion. A patch of reality that looked like heat haze over a summer road, only this gave off no heat. It was a wound in the world. The hum wasn't coming from it, the hum was it. It was the sound of reality being unwritten. As I stared, transfixed, my mind reeled. I could almost see it. Flickering at the edge of the distortion, like static on a screen, were concepts. Not images, but the pure, platonic idea of things. I saw the crisp, cold essence of January. I saw the perfect, inviolable logic of a triangle. I saw the fierce, protective bond of father. I saw them all being drawn into the shimmer, their complexity breaking down, their definitions fraying, until they were smoothed out into a single, simple, resonant frequency. The hum. This wasn't a sickness. It was a cosmic process. A form of entropy, not for energy, but for meaning. It was a universal solvent for complexity. The mill, the industrial revolution, the rhythmic beat of the looms, they hadn't created it. They had just tuned the radio to a station that was always broadcasting. A station that sang a song of simplification, of return to the void. And in that moment of horrifying understanding, I was presented with a choice. Not a dramatic, spoken choice, but a silent, internal one. Two paths lay before me. One path led back out of the mill, away from the hum. I could walk out of Manchester. I could keep going until the hum faded, until I found a place it hadn't touched, if such a place still existed. I could save myself. I would be the last speaker of a dead language, a walking library of a forgotten world, carrying the ghosts of January and triangles and love and fathers with me. I would be utterly, completely, and forever alone, a man out of time, a ghost in the new, simple reality. The other path was stillness. I could just stay. I could stop fighting. I could lower my mental defenses, unclench the fist I'd been making in my mind for months, and just listen. I could let the quiet song wash over me. I could let it smooth away the jagged edges of grief for my sister, the terror of my isolation, the exhausting burden of memory. I could join her in that placid, simple peace. We could be together, in a way. Two simple notes in the same quiet song. I thought of Chloe's face, the serene smile she'd given me. The good feeling Dr. Finch had spoken of. The quiet headplace. The seduction of it was overwhelming. The sheer, crushing exhaustion of being the only one who remembered. My torch flickered and died, plunging me into near-total darkness, with only the faint light from the shimmering hole in the world. The hum seemed to get louder, more insistent, more welcoming. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been minutes or hours. But a decision was made. The walk back to my flat was different. The city didn't feel menacing anymore. The streetlights weren't bleeding, they were just the night suns. The drizzle wasn't miserable, it was just the sky water doing its thing. I passed a group of people, their conversation a gentle murmur of simple tellings, and for the first time, it didn't sound wrong. It sounded calm. I let myself into my flat. The 2 black notebooks were sitting on my desk. They looked strange. Foreign. Full of sharp, complicated sounds that hurt my head to look at. I picked them up. They felt heavy with a weight that I no longer wanted to carry. I walked into the kitchen and dropped them into the rubbish bin, next to the empty milk bottle thing. I felt a sense of relief, a great unburdening. I sat in my chair and looked out the window. The sky wasn't gray. It was the color of no sun. The world was quiet. My head was quiet. It was a good feeling. A simple feeling. The man who raised us. The pointy shape. The cold start one. The words weren't gone. They were just, better now. Simpler. The quiet psalm was everywhere. And I was finally listening. There was no more me, the one who fought. There was just, the feeling of things being right. Rethreaded. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began with the vacuuming. My life in Tokyo was a carefully curated structure of quiet routines. I taught English at a small ikaiwa in Shinjuku, a job that required more patience than passion. My apartment, a sterile box on the 14th floor of a Nakano high-rise, was my sanctuary. It was small, efficient, and blessedly anonymous. From my window, the city was a silent, glittering circuit board, a complex system I could observe without truly participating in. I valued my quiet. I cherished my order. Then, 3 weeks ago, the order was broken. At 3:17 a.m., the sound began. A low, insistent hum from the apartment directly above mine, 15F. It was unmistakably a vacuum cleaner. The first night, I assumed it was a bizarre, one-off emergency. A spilled glass of wine, perhaps. I put in earplugs and willed myself back to sleep. The second night, it happened again. 3:17 a.m. on the dot. The same grating whine of a cheap motor dragging across a wooden floor. Annoyance curdled into unease. This wasn't an emergency, it was a schedule. By the fourth night, the sound was a physical presence in my room. It vibrated through my pillow, a drill aimed at the base of my skull. My carefully structured sleep was shattered. I'd lie awake, watching the numbers on my digital clock tick over to 3:16, my body tensing in anticipation. When the hum started, a wave of impotent fury would wash over me. Who vacuums their apartment in the middle of the night? My Japanese was functional, but not confrontational. The cultural script for this was complex. A direct complaint was considered rude. You were supposed to hint, to suggest, to go through the building manager, the Kanranin. I tried that first. Mr. Sato, the building manager, was a man whose body seemed to have been compressed by gravity and paperwork. He listened to my complaint with the placid disinterest of a statue. Apartment 15F, he said, consulting a ledger. Tanaka-san. An older woman. Lives alone. He bowed slightly. I will leave a note regarding noise regulations. The note did nothing. The vacuuming continued, punctual as a death knell. My performance at work suffered. My students, normally polite and engaging, began to look at me with concern. Alex Sensei, one of my regulars, a kind-faced housewife named Mrs. Abe, asked, "Are you feeling well? You look very tired." I forced a smile. Just a little trouble sleeping. After a week of this auditory torture, politeness be damned, I decided to confront the source. My heart hammered against my ribs as I rode the elevator up one floor. It felt like a tremendous transgression. I stood before the door to 15F, the same sterile metal door as my own, and knocked. The sound of the vacuum cleaner cut out instantly. Silence descended, thick and heavy. I waited. Footsteps, slow and shuffling, approached from within. The lock clicked. The door opened, but only a few inches, held fast by a security chain. In the dark gap, a single eye, clouded with age, peered out at me. It belonged to a woman with a severe haircut of iron gray hair. This must be Mrs. Tanaka. "Hi," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I summoned my best formal Japanese. "Forgive my late-night disturbance, Tanaka-san," I began, bowing my head slightly. "My name is Alex. I live in the apartment below, 14F. She said nothing. Her eye remained fixed on me. "It's about the cleaning," I said, struggling for the right word. "The vacuum cleaner. It is very loud, and it wakes me up every night." Her expression didn't change. There was no flicker of apology, no embarrassment. Just a flat, unnerving stillness. "It begins at the same time," I pressed on, my frustration overriding my caution. 3:17 in the morning. Every morning. For the first time, she reacted. A slow, strange smile crept onto her lips, a smile that didn't reach her eye. "Ah," she breathed. "The alignment." "The what?" She ignored my question. Her gaze drifted down to her hands. It was then that I saw it. She was holding a small wooden spool of crimson thread. With a slow, rhythmic motion, she was unspooling it, wrapping the vibrant red filament around her left wrist, over and over again. The band of thread was already thick, a stark bracelet against her wrinkled skin. "You'll start soon, too," she said, her voice dropping back into a whisper. Her eye flicked back to mine, and it was filled with a pity that was far more terrifying than any anger would have been. "Everyone does. The pattern must be complete." Before I could process this, she pushed the door shut. The lock clicked. I was left standing in the silent, fluorescent-lit hallway, my complaint forgotten, replaced by a profound and chilling bewilderment. When I got back to my apartment, I noticed something on the floor, just inside my door. A single, short piece of red thread. It was the same vivid crimson as the one Mrs. Tanaka had been wrapping around her wrist. I stared at it, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I probably tracked it in from the hallway, I told myself. A coincidence. I picked it up and threw it in the bin, but the image of it, lying there like a tiny, silent promise, stayed with me. The next day, the world felt tilted on its axis. Every scrap of red snagged my attention, a woman's scarf on the subway, a faded campaign poster, the glowing neon of a Coca-Cola sign. They all seemed to pulse with the same unnatural vibrancy as Mrs. Tanaka's thread. I was jumpy, paranoid. I was just tired, I reasoned. Sleep deprivation makes you see things. It makes you connect dots that aren't there. At the Ikaiwa, I was teaching a small class of high school students. We were going through vocabulary drills. The topic was hobbies. "Yuki-chan," I said to a bright, quiet girl in the front row. "What is a hobby you enjoy?" Yuki, who usually doodled anime characters in her notebook, looked up. Her hands were under her desk, and I could see a flash of red. "I enjoy knotting," she said, her voice soft. "Knotting? Like macrame?" "I," she said, shaking her head. "Just knots." She brought her hands up. She was holding a length of crimson thread. With deft, precise movements, she tied a small, perfect, intricate knot in it. Then another. And another. Her fingers moved with an unnerving, practiced grace. Her eyes had the same unfocused, inward look as Mrs. Tanaka's. "My mother taught me," she said, her voice a monotone. "It is very important to get the knots right. For the tension." The other students didn't seem to notice. They were staring straight ahead, their expressions placid. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. I looked down at my own hands, half expecting to see a thread wrapped around my fingers. They were empty. For now. That night, I didn't wait for the vacuum. I sat in my armchair, the one facing the door, and watched the clock. At 3:17 a.m., the hum started from above. But it was joined by something else. A faint, rhythmic tapping from the apartment to my left. And a soft, scraping sound from the right. It was as if the entire building was stirring in its sleep, each resident beginning their own private, punctual, and pointless task. My sanctuary was no longer silent. It was filling up with the sounds of a quiet, creeping madness. And Mrs. Tanaka's words echoed in the humming darkness, "You'll start soon, too. Everyone does. Underscore 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 underscore." Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The world became a tapestry of red thread and unsettling routines. The initial shock hardened into a state of hypervigilance. My life was no longer my own, it was a field study in the quiet contagion that was consuming my corner of Tokyo. I started a new journal, not for my thoughts or feelings, but for data. A blue notebook, crisp and clinical. I called it my log of aberrations. Entry 1, Tanaka-san, 15F. Nightly vacuuming, 3:17 a.m. primary fixation, wrapping crimson thread on left wrist. Entry 2, Yuki-chan, student. Fixation, tying continuous, complex knots in crimson thread. Mentioned tension. The log grew with frightening speed. On the Tozai line, I saw a salaryman in a perfectly pressed suit standing amidst the crush of commuters. He wasn't looking at his phone like everyone else. His gaze was distant, and his right hand, hidden behind his briefcase, was methodically tracing patterns on the metal pole. I leaned closer, pretending to lose my balance. He was tracing the shape of an intricate knot with his index finger, over and over. Tucked into the band of his wristwatch was a tiny, tightly wound coil of red thread. At my local konbini, the usually cheerful clerk who always commented on the weather now performed his duties with a detached, mechanical precision. As he scanned my onigiri and can of coffee, his other hand was busy under the counter. I caught a glimpse of what he was doing, meticulously folding a small square of red cloth into smaller and smaller, impossibly neat squares. He didn't meet my eyes. He just murmured the total, his focus entirely on the task I wasn't supposed to see. The contagion wasn't limited to fixations. There was a sensory component, too. Colors seemed to be bleeding from the world, leaving behind a drained, grayish palette, except for the crimson. The red alone grew more intense, more vivid. It was the red of stoplights, of the torii gates at shrines, of blood. It screamed for attention against the muted backdrop of the city. My isolation deepened. The very nature of the anomaly made it impossible to share. How could I explain it? My upstairs neighbor has a weird cleaning schedule, and I'm seeing red thread everywhere. I'd sound like a classic case of expat burnout, a man cracking under the subtle pressures of a foreign culture. I tried once, with my only real friend, Kenji. He was a second-generation Japanese-American, a graphic designer who straddled the two cultures with an easy grace I envied. We met for ramen in a noisy joint in Shinjuku. The steam and clatter felt grounding, normal. "I think I'm losing my mind," I said, pushing my noodles around the bowl. Kenji took a loud slurp of broth. "More than usual?" he asked, a grin on his face. "I'm serious, Ken." I told him everything. The 3:17 a.m. vacuuming, Mrs. Tanaka and her spool of thread, Yuki and her knots, the salaryman, the clerk. I laid it all out, feeling the insanity of the words as they left my mouth. He listened patiently, his chopsticks resting on his bowl. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Alex," he said finally, his tone gentle. "You've been working too hard. You're not sleeping. Tokyo can do this to you. It's a city of a million tiny, repetitive rituals. You're just noticing them now because you're stressed. It's not that, I insisted. It's the thread, Kenji. The color. It's the same everywhere. And the look in their eyes, it's like they're not really there. Confirmation bias, he said, waving his hand dismissively. You see one weird lady with red thread, and now your brain is wired to look for it. As for the timing, 3:17 a.m. It's probably just a coincidence. Maybe your clock is fast. His rationalizations were the same ones I had tried to use on myself. Hearing them from him felt like a door slamming shut in my face. He wasn't seeing it. He couldn't see it. I was alone in this. Maybe you're right, I mumbled, defeated. I changed the subject, but the rest of the meal was strained. Kenji kept shooting me worried glances, the way you'd look at a fragile relative. I had become a problem to be managed. The secondary mystery that began to haunt me was the time, 3:17. It was too specific to be random. Was it a frequency? A coordinate? A Bible verse? My late night, caffeine-fueled research led me down 100 rabbit holes. I searched for historical events, esoteric numerology, astronomical alignments connected to that time. I found nothing. It was a meaningless number, which only made its rigid observance more terrifying. The sounds in my building became a symphony. At 3:17, Mrs. Tanaka's vacuum would be joined by the tapping from 14D and the scraping from 14C. I started to map them. A rhythmic thumping from 12A. A soft, continuous tearing sound from 16G. I'd stand in the center of my apartment, a new kind of conductor, listening to the disparate noises of my neighbors' private rituals, all starting in perfect, unnerving unison. My log of aberrations became my Bible and my tormentor. I started taking pictures with my phone, surreptitious shots of hands, of wrists, of ankles. A gallery of crimson. A delivery man with a red string tied around his pinky finger. A group of schoolgirls, all with identical red thread friendship bracelets, sitting in a circle in the park, silently braiding longer strands together. An old man on a bench, meticulously winding red thread around a dead pigeon's leg. Each photo was a victory and a nail in the coffin of my sanity. The evidence was irrefutable, yet I was the only one who seemed to be collecting it. One evening, I was walking home through a small local park. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows. I saw a figure I recognized, Mrs. Abe, my kind-faced student. She was standing by a ginkgo tree, her back to me. She was holding a large, embroidery-like hoop. Curiosity warred with a primal instinct to turn and run. I ducked behind a large bush, my heart pounding. She wasn't embroidering. She was weaving. Using a long needle, she was pulling a strand of familiar crimson thread through a piece of burlap stretched taut in the hoop. She was weaving a pattern, a complex, geometric design that looked like a cross between a circuit diagram and an occult sigil. Her movements were fluid, graceful, and utterly obsessive. As I watched, another woman approached and stood beside her. She pulled out a similar hoop and began her own weaving. Then a man. Then another woman. Within 10 minutes, a dozen people stood in a loose circle around the ginkgo tree, each one silently working on their own section of the pattern. They didn't speak or acknowledge each other. They were individual nodes in a silent, distributed network, all working on the same grand, incomprehensible project. I felt a wave of vertigo. This wasn't just a collection of individual ticks. It was coordinated. It was organized. I backed away slowly, my mind reeling. I looked at the photos on my phone, at the entries in my log. I thought of the sounds in my building, all starting at 3:17. A new, horrifying thought began to form. They weren't just performing random tasks. They were threading, knotting, weaving, wrapping. They were building something. Or perhaps, they were rewiring something. And the entire city was their loom. I hurried back to my apartment, my one-man fortress. I locked the door, slid the chain across. I felt a desperate need to talk to Kenji again, to show him the photos, to make him understand. I pulled out my phone and opened our chat history. His last message was from that afternoon. "Hey man, hope you're feeling better. Check out this new logo concept I'm working on. Kinda weird, but I can't get the pattern out of my head." Below the message was an image file. I tapped on it, and my blood ran cold. It was a logo for some fictional tech company. The design was sleek, minimalist, and built around a complex, geometric knot. It was woven from a single, unbroken line of vivid crimson. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Kenji's logo was the tipping point. The contagion had breached my last line of defense, it had infected my only ally. My paranoia, once a rising tide, now became the ocean in which I swam. I stopped going to work, sending a brief, vague email to my boss about a family emergency. The thought of standing in front of a class, of seeing Yuki-chan's nodding hands or Mrs. Abe's serene, weaving expression, was unbearable. My world shrank to the four walls of apartment 14F. My investigation became my sole purpose. I was no longer just a passive observer. I had to understand the nature of the threat. What was it? Where did it come from? One afternoon, driven by a reckless desperation, I followed one of them. He was the salaryman from the train, the one who traced knots on the pole. I spotted him leaving my building. A small loop of red thread was tied neatly around the handle of his briefcase. I pulled on a baseball cap and followed him at a distance, feeling like a spy in a low-budget thriller. He didn't go to a train station. He walked through the labyrinthine residential streets, his pace steady and unhurried. He led me to a part of the neighborhood I'd never seen before, a forgotten industrial zone wedged between the railway tracks and a canal. He stopped in front of a small, dilapidated building that looked like an old textile workshop, its windows opaque with grime. A faded sign above the door read, "Okada Textiles," but it had clearly been out of business for decades. The man didn't knock. He simply pushed the door open and disappeared inside. I waited, my heart hammering, for 20 minutes. When he emerged, he was empty-handed. He walked away in the direction he had come, his expression as placid as ever. My turn. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside, into a world of dust and shadow. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic and faintly organic, like dried blood and ozone. The main room was vast, filled with the hulking, silent shapes of old industrial looms. They were covered in thick shrouds of dust, monuments to a forgotten era. But in the center of the room, one machine was clean. It was an enormous, complex spooling machine, its metal surfaces gleaming as if they'd been polished just hours ago. And from its many spindles, thousands upon thousands of strands of crimson thread cascaded down, pooling on the floor in a shimmering, scarlet sea. This was the source. Or one of them. I approached the machine cautiously. The thread wasn't silk or cotton. I touched a strand. It was strangely warm, with a smooth, almost waxy texture. It felt less like a manufactured fiber and more like something biological, a nerve, a sinew, extruded and dyed. As I looked closer, I saw it pulsed with a very faint, internal light, a slow, rhythmic beat like a slumbering heart. This wasn't technology. It wasn't a psychological phenomenon. It was something else entirely. Something alien, or extra-dimensional, bleeding into our reality and using a forgotten textile mill as its distribution hub. The people weren't going mad, they were being repurposed. They were being integrated into a new system. They were the peripherals, and this thread was the wiring. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Kenji. "Where are you?" "I'm at your door. Let's talk." A jolt of fear, sharp and cold, shot through me. He was here. At my sanctuary. I had to get back. I turned to leave, but my foot snagged on something. I looked down. Several strands of the red thread had wrapped themselves around my ankle. They hadn't been there a second ago. I tried to kick them off, but they clung to me, tightening their grip. Panic flared. I bent down and clawed at them. They were surprisingly strong, and where I tore them away, they left angry red welts on my skin, as if I'd been burned. I finally broke free and scrambled out of the workshop, not daring to look back. I ran all the way to my apartment building, my lungs burning. Kenji was waiting in the hallway outside my door. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale. But it was his hands that caught my attention. He was holding a small, exquisitely crafted box made of dark wood. A single, perfect crimson knot was inlaid on its lid. "Alex, man, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice strained. "Get away from my door, Kenji," I said, my voice shaking. "Whoa, hey, calm down." He took a step forward, holding up the box. "I wanted to show you something. To apologize. I've been a real jerk. You were right. About everything." A flicker of hope ignited within me. "You see it? You finally see it?" "I see it," he said, and a slow, beatific smile spread across his face. It was the same smile I'd seen on Mrs. Tanaka. The same vacant serenity. "But you've got it all wrong, Alex. It's not a breakdown. It's a clarification. An upgrade." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a pristine, untouched spool of crimson thread and a small, silver needle. "I was confused at first," he went on, his voice becoming a hypnotic, calming murmur. "The patterns in my head, the urge to create the knots. But then I just let go. I stopped fighting it. And everything became so clear. The noise, the anxiety, the pointless ambition, it all just falls away. There's only the pattern. There's only the connection." He held the box out to me. "This is for you. It's time, Alex. It's your turn to join. To be a part of it. No more fighting. No more fear. Just peace. Just the work." The word work chilled me to the bone. This was their gospel. I looked from the box to Kenji's eyes, and I saw the truth. My friend was gone. The person standing in front of me was merely a host, a vessel for the contagion, sent to recruit me. My last alliance had not just been tested. It had been inverted. He was now the most immediate threat I faced. "No," I whispered, backing away. His smile faltered. A flicker of confusion, of static, crossed his features. "But, the pattern requires it. Your node is empty. It's causing dissonance. The sounds. The 3:17 a.m. symphony." My apartment was a hole in their network, a silent spot in their orchestra, and it was throwing the entire composition out of key. They hadn't been trying to annoy me, they had been trying to activate me. "I'm not a part of your pattern," I snarled, my hand fumbling for my keys. "Everyone is a part," he said, his voice losing its calm cadence, taking on a harder, insistent edge. "You just haven't been threaded yet." He took another step forward. I finally got my key in the lock, threw the door open, and slammed it shut behind me, sliding the chain and turning the deadbolt just as his fist hammered against the wood. "Alex! Don't you see how beautiful it is?" his muffled voice pleaded. "Everything connected. Everything with a purpose. Just open the door." I leaned against the door, my body trembling uncontrollably. I looked around my sterile apartment. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a prison. And the walls were closing in. From above, the familiar hum of Mrs. Tanaka's vacuum started up, even though it was only mid-afternoon. It was no longer bound by the 3:17 schedule. It was a direct response. A signal. The system had noticed the bug, and it was trying to fix me. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation and Aftermath. The siege began. It wasn't a physical assault of broken doors and shattered windows. It was psychological. It was auditory. The sounds from the surrounding apartments no longer waited for 3:17 a.m. They were constant now, a dissonant chorus of scraping, tapping, tearing, and humming, all directed at me, the silent holdout. They were the sound of a system trying to debug a single, obstinate error. My food supplies dwindled. Sleep became a forgotten luxury, snatched in fractured, paranoid bursts. I taped black garbage bags over my windows, blocking out the sight of the city and the unnerving, pulsing red of its lights. My world became a dark, noisy tomb. The confrontation came not from without, but from within. I was running out of water. The thirst was a physical torment, overriding the psychological kind. I had to make a choice, die of dehydration in my self-imposed prison, or face the rethreaded world outside. My confrontation wasn't with a person, but with a door. My own front door. It was the membrane between my reality and theirs. To open it was to surrender, to admit that my struggle for individuality, for the messy, chaotic, unpatterned life I once knew, was over. With trembling hands, I dismantled my pathetic barricade. I slid the chain back. I turned the deadbolt. The click echoed in the silent apartment like a gunshot. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled the door open. The hallway was silent. Kenji was gone. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was free. Then I saw it. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. From every doorway, every light fixture, every fire alarm, strands of crimson thread emerged. They weren't just scattered, they were woven together, forming an intricate, breathtakingly complex web that filled the entire hallway. The pattern was a three-dimensional tapestry of impossible geometry, glowing with that faint, internal, organic light. It pulsed in unison, a single, silent heartbeat. This wasn't just in the hallway. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the entire building, the entire city, was now like this. Woven. Connected. Complete. The sounds I had been hearing weren't the sound of individual tasks. They were the sounds of this web being created, the hum of the loom, the scrape of the shuttle, the tap of the threads being pulled taut. I stood on the precipice, a man of flesh and bone staring into the nervous system of a new god. There was no one to fight. There was no monster to slay. The threat wasn't an invader, it was a fundamental change in the operating system of reality. And I was the last piece of obsolete code. I stepped out into the hallway. The threads parted before me, rearranging themselves to allow me passage, then sealing up the space behind me. They didn't touch me, but I could feel their presence, a low-level hum against my skin, a pressure in the air. I walked to the elevator and pushed the button. The ride down was silent. The lobby, too, was a cathedral of red thread. Mr. Sato, the building manager, stood perfectly still behind his desk, his hands outstretched. A dozen threads were connected to his fingertips, and he was slowly, meticulously feeding them into a larger, thicker cable that snaked out the front door. He didn't even register my presence. He was just a router now. I walked out into the streets of Tokyo. The world was remade. The sky was a muted, uniform gray, but the city itself was a work of art. Crimson threads stretched between buildings, wrapped around lamp posts, and formed shimmering canopies over the streets. Cars sat motionless, woven into place. And the people, they moved with a slow, synchronized grace, their hands busy with their individual tasks, nodding, weaving, spooling, all contributing to the maintenance of the great pattern. There was no chatter, no traffic, no chaos. Only a profound, humming silence and the quiet industry of the rethreaded. A woman walked past me, her eyes vacant. It was Mrs. Abe. She was holding her embroidery hoop, the pattern on it now glowing brightly. She glanced at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the kind woman from my class. A ghost of a memory. Then it was gone, her eyes refocused on her work, and she moved on, another perfect cog in the perfect machine. I had my revelation. It wasn't about control or malevolence. It was about order. A cosmic drive to turn the chaos of existence into a single, unified, functional pattern. To eliminate the static of individuality, fear, and ambition. In its own terrifying way, it was a form of peace. The peace of the hive. The peace of the circuit. I kept walking, an anomaly in a world of perfect data flow. No one stopped me. No one tried to thread me. It was as if I didn't register anymore. I was a ghost, a remnant of a deleted file. I don't know how long I walked. Days, maybe. I eventually found my way to the docks, to the vast, gray emptiness of the bay. I stood at the edge of a pier, looking out at the water. The pattern ended here, at the shoreline. The sea remained stubbornly, beautifully chaotic. I am forever changed. I did not escape. I was simply, released. An error the system could not process and chose to ignore. I exist on the fringe, in the margins of the new reality. Sometimes, I see other ghosts like me, a frightened tourist huddled in an alley, a wild-eyed man scavenging for untainted food. We don't speak. We just acknowledge each other with a nod, members of a species on the verge of extinction. I live in a shack by the water now. I write this in my blue notebook, the last log of aberrations, which has become the history of a world that no longer exists. I am the last sane man, and my sanity is a curse, for I am the only one who remembers the noise, the mess, the glorious, beautiful chaos of being unconnected. Last night, I found something washed up on the shore, tangled in the seaweed. A single, small, wooden spool. The thread on it was gone, but I recognized it instantly. And this morning, as I woke, I saw it. Lying on the floor of my shack, coiled like a sleeping snake. A single, pristine strand of crimson thread. It must have come from the spool. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. It's just lying there. Pulsing with a soft, patient light. Waiting. The pattern has a place for everything. Even the errors. It seems my turn was not cancelled, only postponed. The alignment is coming. The quiet contagion. The stillness game. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began, as most modern strangeness does, with the assumption of a scream. Some viral challenge, born in the algorithmic ether of TikTok or YouTube, that had migrated into the physical world of Northwood Elementary. I'd seen it all, the bottle flipping, the flossing, the mannequin phases that swept through the preteen population like a benign flu. So when the kids started playing Stillness, I barely registered it. My name is Alex Thorne, and my official title is Child and Youth Worker for the Halton District School Board. In practice, that means I'm a professional worrier, a buffer between fragile kids and a world that often seems designed to crack them. I spent my days in the Bayesian primary color world of Northwood, a sprawling brick school in a sleepy Burlington suburb where the biggest crises were usually scraped knees or playground politics. The stillness game was simple. Deceptively so. A child would be walking, running, talking, and then, if a shadow fell upon them just so, the crisp edge of the school building's shade, the fleeting silhouette of a bird, the long finger of a flagpole, they would freeze. Utterly. Mid-stride, mid-sentence, mid-breath. They'd hold the pose until the shadow passed. It's called stillness, a fifth grader named Liam told me when I found him frozen like a garden gnome by the bike racks, 1 foot on a pedal, face tilted towards the sky. The shadow of the roof's gutter was a perfect dark line bisecting his face. "What's the point, Liam?" I asked, crouching beside him. His eyes didn't move. His voice was a flat monotone that didn't seem to disturb the air. The shadows are taking measurements. Measurements for what? The shadow of a passing cloud slid off him. He blinked, shook his head as if coming out of a trance, and grinned at me. The moment was gone. I dunno. It's just the game, Mr. Thorne. That was the line. It's just the game. I heard it from a dozen kids. The first few times, I smiled. Kids were weird. Their worlds were built on arbitrary, sacred rules. But the phrase was always the same. Not, we're playing freeze tag, or, it's a new thing. It was a specific, unvarying script. The shadows are taking measurements. I brought it up in the staff lounge, a room that perpetually smelled of burnt coffee and disillusionment. It's tick-tock, grunted Cheryl Albright, a veteran 6th grade teacher whose optimism had been eroded to a fine powder over 30 years of service. Some stupid, brain-rotting trend. Give it a week. They'll be trying to swallow cinnamon or something equally brilliant next. Principal Henderson, a man whose ambition had long ago been replaced by a desire for a quiet life, just steepled his fingers. As long as they're not doing it in the middle of traffic, Alex. Keep an eye on it. We don't need a parental complaint about unsafe shadow play. He said it with the weary air of a man who had already fielded complaints about gluten in the paste and insufficiently round kickballs. My first real prickle of unease came when I did what any responsible adult in 2025 does, I searched for it. I waded through the digital morass of TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. I typed in every possible permutation: stillness game, shadow freeze challenge, kids freezing in shadows. Nothing. There were thousands of inane challenges, but not this one. A game being played with identical rules and terminology across an entire school district had somehow left no digital footprint. That felt wrong. In an age where every sneeze and sandwich is documented, a viral phenomenon without a source was like a river without a spring. My attention began to fixate on a 3rd grader named Maya. She was one of my kids, referred for anxiety and social withdrawal. She was a whisper of a girl with eyes that seemed too big for her face, a silent observer who preferred the company of books to people. Maya was exceptional at stillness. Her freezes were instantaneous, her stillness absolute. She could hold a pose for minutes on end, caught by the shadow of a single leaf on the playground asphalt. She didn't fidget. She didn't even seem to breathe. One afternoon, during quiet reading time, I saw her sitting at her desk, bathed in the warm glow of the autumn sun streaming through the large classroom window. The shadow of the window sash lay across her open book. She wasn't reading. She was staring at the shadow line with an unnerving intensity, her finger tracing its edge without touching the paper. I knelt by her desk. "Everything okay, Maya?" She didn't look up. Her voice was barely audible. "It's almost done." "What's almost done?" "The measuring." For me. A cold spider skitter went up my spine. "And what happens when it's done?" She finally looked at me, and her big, dark eyes were utterly serious. "It'll be quiet." She then looked back at her book, picked it up, and began to read as if our conversation had never happened. "For the quiet." I tried to rationalize it. I was overworked. The anniversary of my brother's death was approaching, a time that always left me feeling untethered, seeing patterns in static. I was projecting my own anxieties onto the harmless fantasies of children. I was the one who was broken, not the world. I told myself this every morning. I repeated it every night. The mantra held for 2 more weeks. Then came the evening in the cul-de-sac. I was driving home, the suburban streets painted in the melancholy blues and oranges of twilight. Streetlights were beginning to hum to life, casting pools of lonely sodium yellow light. I turned onto a small, dead-end street called Willow Creek Court, a shortcut I sometimes took. And I saw them. 5 kids. Standing in a loose circle in the middle of the road. One of them was Maya. They were all perfectly, flawlessly still. Not the playful freeze of a game, but the rigid stillness of taxidermy. My headlights washed over them, and the sight was so jarringly wrong that I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt. It wasn't just their stillness. It was their shadows. The streetlights should have cast multiple, pale shadows from each child, splayed out in a web. But that's not what I saw. Each child had a single, impossibly dark, sharp-edged shadow pooled directly at their feet. It was a solid, inky blackness, the kind of absolute shadow you only see at high noon on a cloudless day. It was as if each child was being illuminated by a personal, invisible sun hanging directly over their head. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a game. This wasn't my imagination. This was a violation of the basic rules of light and physics, happening right in front of me. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my hands shaking. I threw the car door open, the dome light flickering on. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Kids! Are you okay?" They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just stood there, 5 small statues in a tableau of impossible light. I took a step towards them, my shoes crunching on the asphalt. The air felt thick, heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. I got to within 20 feet of them. "Maya." As my voice cut through the twilight quiet, it was like a switch was flipped. The unnatural, noonday shadows vanished in an instant, snapping back into the pale, multi-angled grays of the streetlights. All 5 children blinked simultaneously, a synchronized, owl-like motion. They looked at me, then at each other, and erupted into peals of laughter. "You're it, Jason," one of them shrieked, and they scattered, running across lawns and disappearing between houses, their laughter echoing in the now mundane evening air. All except Maya. She stood for a moment, looking at me. There was no laughter in her eyes. There was a deep, ancient weariness. Then she turned and ran after the others, her small form swallowed by the suburban darkness. I stood alone in the middle of the empty road, the engine of my idling car the only sound. My breath plumed in the cool air. I looked down at the spot where they had stood, half expecting to see scorch marks on the asphalt. There was nothing. Just the road. But I couldn't shake the image of those perfect, black shadows. They hadn't just been on the ground. They had felt like holes. Holes in the world, measured and cut to the precise size of a child. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The incident in the cul-de-sac broke something in me. The flimsy partition between explainable weirdness and fundamental wrongness shattered, and I could no longer unsee the cracks spreading through my world. Rationalization was a luxury I could no longer afford. The next day, I bought a black, hardcover notebook and a pack of fine-tipped pens. I began to document everything. My journal became my confidant, my anchor. I logged every instance of the stillness game I witnessed, time, location, duration, the child involved, and the nature of the shadow that triggered it. October 12, 9:15 a.m. Hallway B, Sarah P., GR4. Frozen for 48 seconds by the shadow of a fire extinguisher case. Said the measurement was for her hands. October 14, 12:22 p.m. Playground. Group of 3 GR2 boys. Frozen simultaneously by the shadow of the basketball hoop. Duration, 1 minute 12 seconds. They broke their stillness in perfect sync. October 17, 2:40 p.m. Library. Maya C., GR3. Frozen while sitting at a table. Shadow from a bookcase divider. I timed her. 7 minutes and 21 seconds. Mrs. Davison, the librarian, walked past her twice and didn't seem to notice. Or care. A pattern emerged from the ink-filled pages. The incidents were becoming more frequent, the durations longer. But more than that, a creeping quiet was settling over Northwood Elementary. The boisterous, chaotic energy of a building filled with 400 children was fading. The shrieks on the playground were softer, the chatter in the hallways more subdued. Fights weren't breaking out. Arguments weren't happening. The kids were becoming compliant. Docile. They moved with an unnerving economy of motion, their gazes placid and distant. The stillness game wasn't just a game they played, it was a state they were slowly, permanently entering. Armed with 2 weeks of meticulous notes, I requested another meeting with Principal Henderson. I laid the notebook open on his polished desk, the pages filled with my tight, anxious script. "Look, Robert," I began, foregoing the usual formalities. "This isn't a trend. It's escalating. The children are changing." He picked up the notebook but didn't read it. He weighed it in his hands as if judging its physical, rather than evidential, mass. His eyes were tired. "Alex," he said, his voice gentle, paternal, and utterly dismissive. "You do incredible work here. You care. Sometimes, I think you care too much. You've been under a lot of stress lately. The board has a very generous personal leave policy. Maybe a few days to recharge. This isn't about me being stressed." My voice was sharper than I intended. "This is about the kids. They're like little automatons. Don't you see it? The quiet." He finally looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "I see children who are calm. I see a school with fewer behavioral incidents than any other in the district. From where I'm sitting, Alex, things are improving." He slid the notebook back across the desk. "Take a few days. Doctor's note if you need it. Let's speak again next week." I left his office feeling like I'd been breathing poison gas. It wasn't just that he didn't believe me, it was the way he didn't believe me. The placid dismissal, the serene confidence that everything was fine. He was infected. Not with the game itself, but with the quiet it brought. He was a passive beneficiary of the spreading stillness. My isolation deepened. I tried talking to Cheryl Albright again, cornering her by the photocopier. "Cheryl, you have to have noticed. The kids in your class, they're not the same." She stopped her work, her hands hovering over the machine. For a brief second, her face went slack, her eyes vacant, fixed on the wall behind me. It was a look I was starting to recognize. Then she blinked and focused on me, a brittle smile on her face. "They're focused. For the first time in years, they actually listen. I'm finally getting through the curriculum on schedule. Don't rock the boat, Alex. We have a good thing going." She turned back to the photocopier, and the conversation was over. I was an island. A man screaming about a hurricane that everyone else was calling a pleasant breeze. My nights became a feverish spiral of research. I abandoned the futile search for online trends and dove into deeper, stranger waters. I researched mass hysterias, folie à deux, shared psychotic disorders. Nothing fit. These phenomena were characterized by agitation, anxiety, visible symptoms. This was the opposite, a mass placidity. This led me to the secondary mystery, the subplot that felt like a distraction but was the only thread I could pull. On a whim, I started digging into local history archives online, focusing on Burlington and the surrounding area. I searched for keywords: mass silence, quiet plague, strange behavior. I found a single, tantalizing reference in a digitized copy of a 1928 Hamilton newspaper. The article was about public health initiatives, but a sidebar mentioned a curious local phenomenon from a few years prior, in the early 1920s. It referred to it as the silent season. Unlike the Spanish flu which ravaged the populace with fever and death, the columnist wrote, the silent season, as some old-timers now call it, was a period of profound and unsettling quiet in the smaller townships. Public gatherings dwindled, commerce slowed, and many residents seemed to simply fade from public life. Doctors at the time attributed it to a lingering, low-grade influenza that sapped the will, but official mortality rates do not support this. It remains a peculiar footnote in the region's history. It was a ghost of a clue, a faint echo of what I was seeing now. But it was something. A life raft of external validation. This had happened before. The environmental wrongness, once a peripheral glitch, now demanded my attention. The world, or at least my perception of it, was starting to fray at the edges. One afternoon, standing in my office, I watched the shadow of a cloud move across the soccer field. When it reached the goalpost, the shadow didn't flow over it. It bent. It bent at a perfect 90-degree angle, crawling up the white post like a strip of black cloth, holding its impossible shape for a full second before snapping back to normal. I felt a wave of vertigo so intense I had to grip my desk. Another time, I was walking down hallway C, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me a familiar, monotonous drone. Suddenly, the sound dropped. It didn't stop, it shifted downwards, below the range of normal hearing, into a subaudible thrum that vibrated in my molars and the bones of my skull. The feeling was deeply unpleasant, a physical intrusion of wrongness. I looked at the students passing by. None of them seemed to notice. My paranoia grew. Were these things really happening, or was my mind, under the strain of isolation, finally breaking? Was I the one misperceiving reality, and everyone else was normal? This question haunted me, a far more terrifying prospect than any shadow monster. Deliverance came from an unexpected source. A parent-teacher interview. The parent was Ben Carter, a single father. His son, Leo, was in 4th grade. Leo was a bright, energetic kid who had become one of the most dedicated players of the stillness game. Ben sat across from me in one of the child-sized chairs, his knees practically at his chin. He was a graphic designer, with tired eyes and ink stains on his fingers. "I'm worried about Leo," he said, his voice low. "He's distant. He just stands in his room for hours. Staring. And he draws these." He slid his tablet across the table. It was open to a drawing app. The screen was filled with sketches. They were drawings of shadows. Impossible shadows. A shadow of a lamppost that forked into 2 distinct points. The shadow of a house that seemed to be collapsing in on itself. And one sketch that made my blood run cold, a child's silhouette, impossibly dark, pooled at its feet, exactly like what I'd seen in the cul-de-sac. I looked from the tablet to Ben's face. His expression was a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "You've been seeing it too," I said. It wasn't a question. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was almost painful to watch. Oh God. I thought I was losing my mind. Screen fatigue, I kept telling myself. Too many hours staring at pixels. But it's real, isn't it? The glitches. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone. I opened my journal and pushed it across the table to him. He read my entries, his eyes growing wider with every page. We sat there for an hour in that empty classroom, 2 men sharing a secret reality, our quiet words a small pocket of sanity in a world that was gently, inexorably, going mad. The hurricane had 2 witnesses now. We didn't know what it was, but we knew its name. And we knew it was coming for us all. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of a fellow witness, an ally, was like a gulp of fresh air after being held underwater. Ben and I began to meet in secret, usually at a 24-hour diner halfway between our homes, a place of transient anonymity. We'd sit in a worn vinyl booth, my notebook and his tablet on the table between us, piecing together our shared nightmare over lukewarm coffee. "It's not a mass hysteria," Ben said one night, scrolling through his sketches of impossible geometry. He had the precise eye of a designer, and he saw the wrongness in terms of vectors and rendering errors. "Hysteria is in the mind. This is in the world. It feels like a rendering engine buckling under pressure. Like we're a simulation and someone is trying to install new software on top of the old code." His analogy clicked with my own fragmented thoughts. The stillness game, I mused, stirring my coffee. The kids aren't just freezing. They're holding still so the new software can get a clean scan. So it can map them. Exactly, Ben said, his eyes alight with the grim excitement of a detective. It's taking measurements. That's what they say. It's measuring the objects it's going to replace or overwrite. And the children, they're the most receptive. Their minds are more plastic. They're the early adopters. We started to build a theory. It wasn't a contagion in the biological sense. It was something, informational. An extra-dimensional bleed-through, a form of consciousness that perceived reality as a blueprint it could edit. The shadows weren't just shadows, they were the tools, the scanners, the survey equipment of this silent, invisible architect. Its goal wasn't destruction, but replacement. It was paving over our reality with a new one, a quieter, stiller, more orderly version of it. And the silent season of the 1920s? It wasn't a trial run. It was the last time this entity had passed through, laying a foundation. Now, it was back to continue the work. As our theory took shape, the world outside our diner booth continued its slow, quiet decline. Northwood Elementary was no longer just subdued, it was somber. Recess was a surreal diorama of stillness. Dozens of children would stand scattered across the playground, caught in the shadows of the slide, the swings, the fence, frozen for minutes at a time in a silent, collective ritual. The few who still ran about did so with a strange lack of enthusiasm, their laughter thin and hollow. The adults were succumbing, too. The change was more subtle in them, a slow sanding down of their personalities. Cheryl Albright now taught her lessons in a near monotone, her students listening with a rapt, uniform attention that would have once been a teacher's dream but was now the stuff of nightmares. I saw her one afternoon, standing by the window, her hand resting on the glass, just watching her own shadow on the lawn. She had the same placid, vacant look as the children. Principal Henderson was the worst. He rarely left his office. I'd walk past and see him through the vertical blinds, sitting at his desk, not doing paperwork, not on the phone, just sitting. A faint, pleasant smile on his face, he'd stare at the motivational poster on his wall for hours. He had accepted the quiet. He was cultivating it. My alliance with Ben was my only shield against the encroaching dread. But that shield was about to be tested. His son, Leo, had become one of the stillest, as we'd started calling the most affected children. He would spend entire evenings in his bedroom, standing in the corner, unmoving. Ben would watch him on the baby monitor they'd repurposed, his heart breaking. One Saturday, Ben called me, his voice tight with panic. "Alex, you have to come over. It's Leo. Something's wrong." I drove to his neat little bungalow, my stomach in knots. Ben met me at the door. His face ashen. He's been like this for 3 hours. He won't respond. He led me to Leo's bedroom. The boy was standing by his bookshelf, his body perfectly rigid, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The only light came from a desk lamp, which should have thrown a long, distorted shadow across the room. Instead, the shadow at Leo's feet was a small, perfect, unnaturally dark circle, just like in Ben's sketches. "Leo?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "Son, can you hear me?" No response. The boy was a statue. Ben's frayed nerves finally snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing his son by the shoulders. "Leo! Stop it! Stop this now," he yelled, shaking him. Leo's body was limp in his father's grasp, but he offered no resistance. His head lolled, and his eyes, which had been staring at the wall, turned to look at his father. And in that moment, I saw it. They were not the eyes of a child. They were ancient, empty, and utterly devoid of recognition. They were like two dark windows into a vast, silent, uncaring cosmos. The shadow on the floor seemed to react to Ben's frantic energy. It didn't just sit there, it pulsed, deepening in blackness, and for a terrifying instant, I saw it writhe, like a living thing disturbed from its slumber. The temperature in the room plummeted. Ben recoiled from his son as if he'd been burned, stumbling backward and falling to the floor. Leo's head turned back to the wall, his stillness absolute once more. The terror on Ben's face was of a different kind now. It wasn't the fear of the unknown phenomenon anymore. It was the primal, soul-shattering fear of a parent who has looked at their child and seen a stranger looking back. He wasn't afraid of the entity, he was afraid of what he would lose if he fought it. He was afraid of losing the calm, quiet boy who was replacing the son he knew. I helped him up. We left the room, closing the door softly on the still, silent child and his possessive shadow. We sat in his living room, the silence thick with what we had both seen. Maybe it's not so bad, Ben finally said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He wouldn't look at me. He's calm. He's not hurting anyone. Maybe we should just let it happen. Adapt. It's better than this. Fighting it. Ben, you don't mean that, I pleaded. Look at what it's doing to him. To all of them. He's still my son, he shot back, his eyes flashing with a desperate, defensive fire. He's in there. I can't risk losing him completely. I can't. The alliance was broken. The shared foxhole had shrunk to fit only one. Ben had chosen his side, or rather, he had chosen inaction, which was the same as choosing the side of the quiet. He would adapt. He would learn to love the placid stranger in his son's room. I walked out of his house that day feeling more profoundly alone than ever before. My investigation became an obsession, a frantic race against the encroaching silence. I needed to know the epicenter. Why Northwood? Why this town? I went back to the silent season clue. I cross-referenced the 1928 newspaper article with old property maps from the town archives. My blood ran cold when I found it. Northwood Elementary School, built in 1974, stood on a plot of land that had previously been occupied by something else. From 1919 to 1935, it had been the location of the Halton Pines Sanatorium, a facility for patients with tuberculosis and other wasting diseases. A place of profound quiet, of slow fading. A place where people had been sent to be still. The school wasn't just a random target. It was the focal point. The ground itself was consecrated to this entity, this quiet contagion. It had been waiting patiently under the soccer fields and playgrounds, and now, it had woken up. And I was standing right in the middle of it. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. I was out of time. The quiet was no longer creeping, it was consuming. The school had become a temple of stillness, the students its silent congregation, and the faculty its placid high priests. Ben no longer returned my calls. The world had moved on, leaving me as a noisy, frantic ghost haunting its serene new halls. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket. But beneath it, a desperate, incandescent spark of rage remained. I couldn't fight the entity. I couldn't reason with it. But I could, perhaps, throw a rock through its stained glass window. My plan was born of that rage. It was chaotic, reckless, and likely pointless. If the entity fed on order and quiet, if its goal was to smooth the world into a featureless plane of tranquility, then my only weapon was the opposite. Noise. Chaos. Unpredictability. A psychological wrench thrown into the silent, grinding gears of its reality engine. The moment came during the annual fall assembly. The entire school was gathered in the gymnasium. It was supposed to be a celebration, with student presentations and songs. Instead, it was a funereal tableau. 400 children sat cross-legged on the polished floor in perfect rows, their hands in their laps, their faces upturned towards the stage with the same empty, pleasant expression. The teachers sat on chairs along the walls, mirroring their students' unnerving calm. The air was thick with a silence that felt heavier than sound. Principal Henderson was at the podium, but he wasn't speaking. He was just standing there, smiling his faint, beatific smile, basking in the profound orderliness of it all. This was his masterpiece. My heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I had a portable Bluetooth speaker tucked into my jacket, my phone in my hand, queued up. I slipped out a side door and ran to the nearest fire alarm pole station. My hand hovered over the lever. This was the point of no return. I would be fired. I might even be arrested. But the Alex Thorne who cared about those things was already gone, lost to the isolation and the fear. I pulled the lever down. The effect was instantaneous and glorious. A deafening, piercing siren blared through the gymnasium, and brilliant white strobe lights began to flash, shattering the tomb-like silence. For the first time in weeks, I saw a genuine, spontaneous reaction from the children. They flinched. They squinted, their hands flying up to cover their ears. Confusion, fear, annoyance, a beautiful, messy cascade of normal human emotions, rippled across their faces. The placid veil was torn. That was my cue. I burst back into the gym, vaulted onto the stage, and hit play on my phone. A wall of sound erupted from the speaker in my jacket, a chaotic, atonal blast of free jazz saxophone screeches, industrial noise, and distorted feedback I had downloaded specifically for this purpose. It was the sound of a nervous system being torn apart. It was the antithesis of the quiet. It worked. Or it seemed to. The children were on their feet now, crying, shouting, looking to their placid teachers for guidance the adults were incapable of giving. The spell was broken. I felt a wild, triumphant surge of victory. But the victory was short-lived. The reaction from the anomaly was not one of retreat. It was one of anger. The shadows in the gymnasium, the long, dark rectangles under the bleachers, the spiderweb lines from the steel rafters, the amorphous blobs beneath the basketball hoops, the hundreds of small shadows cast by the panicked children, they all began to move. They didn't just stretch or bend. They lifted off the floor. Like sheets of black silk, they peeled themselves away from the surfaces they belonged to, defying gravity. They drifted upwards, drawn to the center of the room, the shrieking alarm and chaotic music seeming to fuel their coalescence. The shadows merged, flowing into one another, creating a shape in the air. It wasn't a monster with claws or teeth. It was something far worse. It was a three-dimensional hole in the world. A vortex of anti-light, a swirling, silent mass of pure blackness that absorbed the flashing strobes and seemed to swallow the very sound around it. Looking at it caused a wave of nauseating vertigo, a sense that the fundamental geometry of the space was collapsing. This was the architect. This was the force that was taking the measurements. It wasn't just laying a foundation, it was clearing the site. The teachers, Henderson, Albright, none of them reacted. They sat in their chairs, smiling their serene smiles, as if watching a hole being punched through reality was the most normal part of any school assembly. My eyes scanned the chaos, and I saw her. Maya. She was standing near the edge of the swirling void, not panicked like the other children. She was mesmerized. She looked at me, and for a heartbreaking second, I saw the old Maya in her eyes, the frightened, anxious little girl I was supposed to protect. Then her gaze shifted back to the void, and she took a small, deliberate step towards it, as if answering a call. A choice, stark and absolute, presented itself. To my right was the emergency exit, propped open, a doorway back to the mundane world of sirens and consequences. To my left was Maya, and the silent, hungry emptiness that was about to claim her. There was no real choice. Not for me. I ran. Not away, but towards. I shoved past frightened children, my focus locked on Maya's small form. I grabbed her hand. It was cold as ice. The skin felt smooth, too smooth, like polished stone. Run! I screamed, my voice sounding thin and distant as the vortex deadened the air. I shoved her, hard, towards the exit. Don't stop. Don't look back. For a moment, she resisted, her gaze still fixed on the beautiful, terrible emptiness. But my raw panic, my genuine fear, seemed to cut through her trance. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a flicker of her old self, and then she turned and fled, a small girl running from a nightmare. As I watched her go, ensuring she was safe, I felt a shift in the air behind me. The noise of my speaker, the shriek of the alarm, the crying of the children, it all began to fade. The swirling vortex of non-light turned its non-attention to me. The source of the chaos. The disruption. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel fear. The last thing I experienced was a profound, absolute silence washing over me, a wave of pure peace that extinguished everything. The frantic, screaming thoughts in my head went quiet. The grief for my brother, the professional anxieties, the terror, the rage, all the jagged, noisy pieces of Alex Thorne were smoothed away, erased, leaving behind only a perfect, placid stillness. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 months later, a new child and youth worker, a bright-eyed young woman named Sarah, walked across the Northwood Elementary parking lot for her first day. The school was a marvel, a legend within the district. No behavioral incidents. Perfect attendance. The calmest, most focused student body in the province. As she approached the main entrance, she saw a janitor meticulously sweeping the already spotless pavement. He worked with a quiet, preternatural grace, his movements economical and precise. He paused in his work, standing perfectly still, his shadow pooled at his feet in a sharp, dark circle, though the sky was a blanket of uniform gray cloud. "Good morning," Sarah said, offering a friendly smile. The janitor turned. His face was calm, his eyes peaceful and empty. He gave a slight, pleasant nod, but said nothing. He watched her go into the building, then turned back to his work, his broom making a soft, rhythmic, whispering sound on the pavement. A quiet sound for a quiet world. He was very good at his job. He never complained. He was never stressed. He was a model of efficiency. He was, after all, perfectly still inside. And the measurements, for him, were finally complete. Welcome, welcome again. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The heat in Coral Bay doesn't just press down, it breathes. It's a wet, salty exhalation that clings to your skin, tasting of sunscreen and fried calamari. I was born in that heat, marinated in it for 32 years. My name is Finn, and my life is measured in the ebb and flow of tourist tides. I run the Bait and Tackle and Sundries, a small shop smelling of cured pilchards and melting wax, wedged between a garish souvenir shack and a perpetually busy gelato parlor. My days have a rhythm, a metronome beat set by the sun. Pre-dawn walk along the shoreline, watching the ghost crabs skitter away from the incoming light. Open the shop at 7. Sell bait to the eager morning fishhoes. Sell overpriced sunglasses to the tourists who've forgotten theirs. Sell aloe vera to the ones who, yesterday, had sworn they don't burn. Close up at 6. A quiet beer at the surf club, watching the sky bleed orange over the Pacific. Sleep. Repeat. It's a loop, I suppose, but it's always been my loop. The change began subtly, a single off-key note in a familiar song. It started with the Turners, a family from Melbourne. I sold them a bucket and spade set on a Tuesday. The dad, a cheerful man with a peeling nose, clapped me on the shoulder. First time here. It's paradise. Lived here all my life, I said with my practiced, non-committal smile. On Wednesday, they came in for ice creams. The dad beamed at me, his nose now a brighter shade of crimson. First time here, he asked, his voice identical, the intonation a perfect echo. You'll love it. I blinked. You were in yesterday, mate. For the bucket and spade. He just laughed, a hollow sound. Must have been someone else. We just got in. His wife and 2 kids nodded in perfect, smiling unison. I sold them their ice creams, a cold knot tightening in my gut. Stress, I told myself. Too many faces, they all start to blur. But the note kept sounding, and it was always the same. Tourists I'd given directions to just hours before would approach me again, maps flapping in the sea breeze, and ask the way to the esplanade with the same bright, vacant curiosity. The initial greeting became a kind of mantra. First time here. You'll love it. It was a cheerful, welcoming virus. The real unease, the kind that settles deep in your bones, started when the locals caught it. It was Mrs. Gable who broke the seal. She's run the Good Loaf Bakery since before I was born. She gave me my first jam tart. She knows my coffee order by heart, long black, 1 sugar. Last Monday, I went in for my morning brew. She was standing behind the counter, arranging lamingtons in a perfect pyramid. She looked up as the bell on the door chimed, and her face, a roadmap of 80 years of smiles and worries, smoothed into an expression of beatific blankness. "Welcome to Coral Bay," she chirped, her voice a good octave higher than usual. I stopped. "Morning, Elspeth. Just the usual, please." "It's a beautiful spot," she continued, not seeming to hear me, her hands hovering over the lamingtons. "Best in Queensland." "Elspeth?" I took a step closer. "You all right?" Her eyes, pale blue and usually so sharp, were unfocused. She turned her head slightly, as if listening to a distant radio. Then she snapped back, looked me square in the face, and with the brilliant, unwavering smile of a pageant queen, she said, "Welcome to Coral Bay." I left without my coffee. Down the street, Kev the butcher, a man whose primary mode of communication was a grunt, was leaning on his doorway. As I passed, he straightened up and bellowed, "Welcome to Coral Bay." I flinched, turning to stare, but he'd already gone back to wiping down his window, his expression as placid as a sleeping dog. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Was this some kind of town-wide joke they were all playing on me? A flash mob of pleasantries? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the council had launched a new tourism campaign, some radical friendliness initiative. It was stupid, but it was better than the alternative that was starting to form in the back of my mind, that the people I had known my entire life were being replaced by cheerful, hollow-sounding wind-up toys. My walks on the beach became less about peace and more about observation. I noticed things. A woman in a yellow sundress, standing ankle-deep in the surf, picking up a piece of driftwood, admiring it for exactly 90 seconds, and then placing it back in the water. The next day, at the same time, a different woman in a different dress did the exact same thing with the exact same piece of driftwood. There was a busker, a young guy with dreadlocks, who played his guitar near the surf club. He was good. But he only ever played 3 songs. Wonderwall, Key San, and a surprisingly decent acoustic version of Down Under. He played them in that order. Over and over. I timed him once. The 3-song set took 11 minutes and 45 seconds. After the last chord of Down Under, he would pause for 3 seconds, take a sip from his water bottle, and begin the opening strum of Wonderwall again. No banter. No thank yous when people threw coins in his case. Just the loop. I live in a small flat above my shop. It's cluttered with fishing gear, books I mean to read, and a general sense of bachelorhood. My window looks out over the main street. I started spending my evenings not with a beer, but with a notebook, watching. 7:14 p.m., Mr. and Mrs. Harrison from number 12 walk their poodle. He stops at the bin outside the chemist. They have the same quiet argument about the leash. Every night. 8:02 p.m., the streetlights flicker. Not a random flicker. It's a pattern. Long, short, short. Long, short, short. Like Morse code for a single, endlessly repeated letter. 9:30 p.m., a young couple walks out of the Italian restaurant. They stop under the streetlight. He tucks a strand of hair behind her ear. She laughs. They kiss. It's romantic the first time you see it. It's profoundly disturbing the 30th time. The world was becoming a stage, and everyone but me had been given a script. My own lines felt foreign in my mouth. Normal conversations became minefields. "How's business, Finn?" asked Liam, my best and maybe only real friend. He ran the local surf school, his skin the color of teak, his hair bleached white by the sun. We were having our usual Thursday beer at the surf club. "It's weird, mate," I began, testing the waters. "Weird good or weird bad?" he asked, taking a swig of his beer. "Just weird. Have you noticed people are sort of repeating themselves?" Liam laughed, a big, booming sound that usually put me at ease. Now it just felt loud. "That's called getting old, Finn. You should hear my dad. Tells the same fishing story every time I see him." "No, not like that. It's different. It's exact. Kev the butcher, Mrs. Gable, they keep welcoming me to town. Like I'm a tourist." Liam frowned, but not with concern. With confusion. He looked out at the ocean, the waves rolling in under a lavender sky. "Well, it is a welcoming town. That's why people love it." He turned back to me, and his eyes had that same glossy sheen I'd seen in Mrs. Gable's. A beatific smile spread across his face. "Best spot in Queensland. Welcome to Coral Bay." He winked, as if sharing a joke, but the wink was mechanical. A twitch. The words weren't his. They were a recording. My blood ran cold. I felt the wooden bench beneath me, the condensation on my beer glass, the salt spray on my face. It was all real. But the person opposite me, the friend I'd grown up with, had just been momentarily replaced by an answering machine. I mumbled an excuse about needing to check on the shop and left him there, staring out at the surf with that serene, empty smile. I walked home, the rhythmic crash of the waves sounding less like nature and more like a machine. "Welcome. Crash. You'll love it. Crash. First time here. Crash." That night, the dream came for the first time. I was on the main road out of town, the one that winds through the sugarcane fields before hitting the Bruce Highway. I was driving my old Uda, the windows down, the air thick with the sweet smell of the cane. But no matter how far I drove, I never got anywhere. The same row of crooked fence posts, the same weathered, fresh mangoes sign, the same dead tree shaped like a grasping hand, they kept appearing on the side of the road. I was driving 60 kilometers an hour, but I was stationary. And on the radio, a cheerful voice, over and over, said, "Welcome to Coral Bay. You'll love it here." I woke up sweating, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sun was just starting to color the horizon. Outside my window, the town was waking up. I could already hear the first cheerful greetings echoing in the street below. The sound was no longer welcoming. It was the sound of a cage being locked. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The notebook became my only confidant. Its ruled pages a sanctuary for my sanity. I stopped trying to rationalize and started documenting. The black biro became an extension of my paranoia, scratching down observations that felt like evidence in a trial where I was the sole prosecutor, judge, and jury. Tourist, male, 50s, Hawaiian shirt. Stood in front of the war memorial from 10:15 a.m. to 10:47 a.m. Did not read the names. Stared at the beak of the bronze eagle. The ice cream truck. Plays Greensleeves on a loop. Never stops for customers. Just circles the 4 main blocks of the town center, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Liam. Saw him teaching a surf class. His instructions are now a perfect loop. Paddle, paddle, paddle. Up you get. Bend the knees. Great job. Welcome to Coral Bay. He says it even when the student is face down in the whitewash. The contagion was evolving. The initial simple greetings were now branching into more complex, role-specific scripts. The cheerful automaton that had possessed Mrs. Gable was now a baker automaton. The one in Liam was a surf instructor automaton. Each person was being boiled down to their simplest social function, their personality sanded away to a smooth, predictable surface. My isolation deepened with every failed attempt to connect. I'd try to break the script, to force a moment of genuine interaction. "Hey, Liam," I said, cornering him as he packed up his boards. "Remember that time we took your dad's tinny out to the reef and the engine died? And we had to paddle back with our surfboards?" He paused, a flicker of something in his eyes. A brief, momentary confusion. For a second, I thought I had him. I saw my friend in there, behind the glaze. "Yeah," he said slowly, his brow furrowed. The water was so clear that day." Hope surged in my chest. "Exactly. And that massive turtle." But the window had closed. His face cleared, the serene smile locking back into place. "The water's always clear in Coral Bay. Perfect for a lesson. First time here." The whiplash was nauseating. It was worse than a simple denial. It was like watching a drowning man surface for a breath, only to be pulled back under by an invisible current. I stopped trying with Liam. It was too painful. My life shrank to the four walls of my shop and my flat. My customers were a parade of looping strangers and looping neighbors. I served them with a grim efficiency, my own pleasantries feeling like a desperate attempt at camouflage. "Enjoy the weather. Have a good one." I was terrified that if I stopped, if I didn't play my part as the shopkeeper, the contagion would notice me. That it would decide I was a bug in the system and erase me, replacing me with a new Finn who would endlessly recommend the best bait for bream and welcome everyone, to Coral Bay. The breaking point, the moment my passive dread turned into active fear, was the day I tried to leave. It was a Tuesday. The sky was a searing, cloudless blue. The loops seemed tighter, more frequent. I saw the same child drop and cry over the same scoop of mint choc chip gelato 3 times in the space of an hour. I couldn't take it anymore. I locked the shop, put a "back in 1 hour" sign on the door, a lie, a prayer, and got in my Uda. I didn't pack a bag. I just needed to prove the dream was wrong. I needed to see the Bruce Highway. I needed to see a sign that didn't say, "Welcome to Coral Bay." I drove down the main street, past the smiling, welcoming faces. I turned onto the road heading west, the one that cut through the cane fields. The air grew thick and sweet. I passed the crooked fence posts. I passed the mango sign. I passed the dead, grasping tree. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I kept driving, my eyes fixed on the horizon. 10 minutes. 20. The road unspooled before me, a ribbon of gray asphalt between walls of green cane. Then I saw it again. The dead tree. My foot slammed on the brake, the Uda skidding to a halt. It was impossible. I hadn't turned around. The road was straight. I looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was also straight. I was trapped in a topographical paradox. I put the Uda in gear and drove on, faster this time. The cane fields became a green blur. Dead tree. Mango sign. Fence posts. And then, ahead of me, rising like a pastel-colored mirage, was the skyline of Coral Bay. I saw the surf club, the Norfolk pines, the glint of the sun on the War Memorial's bronze eagle. I had driven in a perfectly straight line for 30 minutes and arrived exactly where I started. I pulled over, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I grabbed my phone. Google Maps. The satellite image was clear. A blue dot, me, sat on the road. I typed in Brisbane. The route appeared, a reassuring blue line heading south. Proceed to the route, a calm, digital voice instructed. I started driving again, my eyes glued to the screen. The blue dot moved along the blue line. It followed the curve of the road as it supposedly swept south. But through my windscreen, I saw the main street of Coral Bay getting closer. I saw Mrs. Gable sweeping the pavement outside her bakery. The phone screen showed me driving through empty bushland. My eyes showed me driving past my own shop. The blue dot continued its phantom journey south while I drove in a circle, a prisoner of a psychic cul-de-sac. That's when I started finding the postcards. The first one was lying on the sand during my morning walk, half buried near the titterline. It was sepia-toned, the corners soft with age. The picture was of the Coral Bay jetty, but it was shorter, cruder than the one that stood today. On the back, in faded, spidery cursive, was a message. The tide remembers what the town forgets. I thought it was just a strange piece of old litter. Then I found another, a few days later, tucked into the pages of a tourist brochure. This one showed the old hotel, pre-renovations. The welcome is a net. The smiles are the bait. A third one appeared on the counter of my shop, seemingly from nowhere. A picture of the main street, with horse-drawn carts instead of cars. They don't leave. They are filed away. Don't forget the way out. The messages were a counter-narrative to the town's cheerful monologue. They were whispers of dissent from a forgotten time. A secondary mystery, yes, but one that felt like a lifeline. Someone else had seen this. Someone else had tried to warn people. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. I wasn't the first. My paranoia found a new focus. I wasn't just observing the loops anymore, I was hunting for the postcards, for any break in the pattern. I became a scavenger, my eyes scanning gutters, bins, the sand. I was looking for glitches in the matrix, breadcrumbs left by a previous prisoner. One afternoon, I was watching the street from my window when I saw something new. A tourist, a young woman with a large backpack, was sitting on a bench opposite my shop. She wasn't looking at the ocean or the people. She was looking at the streetlights. The ones that blinked their endless, single-letter Morse code. She had a small notebook, just like mine, and she was writing in it, her head cocked with intense concentration. She wasn't part of the loop. She was watching it. My heart leaped. An ally? Another observer? I had to know. I grabbed the most recent postcard I'd found, "The song from the reef is the key to the lock," and went downstairs. I walked across the street, my steps feeling loud and clumsy. She looked up as I approached, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She wasn't smiling. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen all week. "You see it too, don't you?" I said, my voice low and urgent. She didn't answer immediately. She studied my face, her expression cautious. She glanced at the looping passers-by, then back at me. "See what?" she asked, her voice a quiet murmur. "The repetition. The loops. The greetings." I felt foolish saying it out loud. A flicker of recognition. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "I thought I was going crazy," she whispered. "I got here 3 days ago. Seemed perfect. Too perfect. It's like a resort run by sleepwalkers." Relief washed over me so intensely I felt dizzy. "I'm Finn. I live here." "Chloe," she said, finally closing her notebook. "I'm just passing through. Or trying to." "The road doesn't work," I said. "Or the maps." "Tell me about it," she grimaced. "I took a bus yesterday that drove for 2 hours and dropped me off at the same bus stop I left from. The driver just smiled and said, 'Welcome to Coral Bay.'" We stood there for a moment, two sane people in a sea of pleasant madness. The feeling of shared reality was intoxicating. I wasn't alone. "I've been finding these," I said, holding out the postcard. She took it, her eyes widening as she read the message. "The song from the reef," she murmured, looking out towards the water. "The sound of the waves, sometimes it doesn't sound random, does it?" "No," I said, a shiver running down my spine. "It doesn't." For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. We were two people, armed with a few cryptic postcards and the terrifying knowledge that our world was a fragile, looping illusion. It wasn't much. But it was a start. We agreed to meet the next day, to pool our notes, to try and figure out what the hell was happening to Coral Bay. As I walked back to my shop, the endless chorus of "Welcome. You'll love it here," seemed, for the first time, just a little less powerful. It was still a cage, but now, maybe, I'd found someone to help me look for the key. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Chloe was methodical, a breath of cool, analytical air in my sweltering panic. She was a linguistics student backpacking her way through Australia, and her brain was wired to find patterns. While I had a notebook full of desperate, panicked observations, she had charts. She was mapping the loops, categorizing the phrases, timing the intervals. "It's not random, and it's not just mimicry," she explained, as we sat in the dusty back room of my shop, surrounded by boxes of fishing lures and deflated beach balls. The door was locked, the blinds drawn. "It's like a distributed neural network. Each person is a node, running a simple subroutine. The welcome script is the base code, the operating system. But there are specialized programs. The baker. The butcher. The surf instructor. And the tourist," I added grimly. "Their job is to arrive, be delighted, and never leave." Exactly. The system's primary function seems to be accretion. She tapped her pen on her notebook. It draws people in and assimilates them. It feeds on new consciousness. Her detached, academic language was both chilling and comforting. It gave a name to the horror. We pieced together what we had. My local knowledge and the cryptic postcards, her analytical framework. The postcards were our Rosetta Stone. The tide remembers what the town forgets. The song from the reef is the key to the lock. It led us to the town library. The library was a quiet, musty haven, and, blessedly, seemed to be a dead zone for the contagion. The librarian, a stern woman named Ms. Albright, was blessedly herself, curt, efficient, and not remotely welcoming. Perhaps the system had no use for a gatekeeper of information. Or perhaps, as Chloe theorized, complex, non-repetitive knowledge was anathema to it. We delved into the town archives, Chloe's fingers flying across old microfiche readers while I sifted through brittle, yellowed newspapers. The official story of Coral Bay's founding was simple, a timber settlement that slowly grew into a fishing village and then a tourist town. But buried in personal diaries and obscure shipping logs, we found a different story. It was in the journal of a lighthouse keeper from 1891. He wrote of a shipwreck, the Sea Serpent, that went down just off the coast during a freak storm. There were no recorded survivors. But his journal told a different tale. He wrote of seeing wreckage wash ashore, and with it, dazed, smiling survivors who couldn't remember their own names. All they could talk about was the beautiful, calming song they'd heard coming from the water as their ship sank. A song from the reef. They have no past, the keeper wrote. They just are. They smile and bid me good day and set about building huts. They seem content, but their eyes are as empty as a gull's egg. It is a happy, terrible place. A paradise with no exit. We found other stories. Mentions in the 20th century of tourists who checked into the hotel and simply stayed. Their luggage left untouched in their rooms, their cars parked in the same spot for years until they were eventually towed. They were absorbed into the town's fabric, taking up simple jobs, their old lives forgotten. They were filed away, just as the postcard said. Our theory solidified. The contagion wasn't a virus or a toxin. It was the town itself. Or rather, something that wore the town like a disguise. The thing on the reef, the source of the song, was some kind of consciousness, ancient and vast. A psychic predator. Coral Bay was its lure, a meticulously constructed trap of pleasantries and sunshine designed to ensnare minds. The loops were the bars of the cage, behaviors worn so smooth by repetition that they became walls, preventing any thought of escape. The town didn't just loop, it digested. As our understanding grew, so did the threat. The system seemed to notice our descent. The loops began to tighten around us. One evening, we were walking along the esplanade, discussing our findings in hushed tones. As the sun touched the horizon, a collective sigh went through the town. Every single person on the street, tourists, locals, Kev the butcher, Liam, Mrs. Gable, stopped dead. They turned in unison to face the setting sun over the ocean. A single, soft, synchronized sigh escaped their lips. It was a sound of utter contentment, of blissful surrender. For 5 seconds, the town was a silent congregation worshipping the reef. Then, just as suddenly, they all turned back, and the loops resumed. The couple started their argument about sunscreen. The busker began, Wonderwall. The effect was profoundly menacing. It was a display of power. A reminder of the absolute control the system wielded. The environmental warping became more aggressive. The road out of town no longer just looped me back, I saw it shimmer in the heat haze, folding in on itself like a cheap suit. Shadows stretched at unnatural angles, clinging to our feet. Sometimes, in my peripheral vision, the familiar pastel storefronts seemed to flicker, revealing for a split second an architecture of gray, alien geometry. The sound of the waves changed, too. It was no longer just a potential source of the song. The hum was clearer now, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in our chests. We could almost make out words, a repetitive, soothing chant that promised peace and rest and an end to all worry. It was a siren song for the soul, and we had to actively fight its pull, plugging our ears, humming our own tunes, anything to keep the psychic tendrils out of our minds. We were making progress, but we were also trapped on a shrinking island of sanity. Our alliance was the only thing keeping us afloat. We have to break the pattern, Chloe said one night, her face pale in the lamplight of my back room. Not just for us. For everyone. The system is based on predictability. It can't handle true spontaneity. It can't handle a variable it doesn't expect. What do you mean? I asked. Your postcards. Don't forget the way out. It's not just a physical direction. It's a mental one. The way out of the loop is to reject it. To do something it can't process. We began planning. Our goal was to create a moment of pure, unscripted chaos. A cognitive bomb thrown into the heart of the machine. We decided to target the moment of the synchronized sunset sigh. It was the moment the system was most exposed, its control most overt. It was the moment we would strike back. Our plan was simple, desperate. We would introduce a new sound, a new set of words, a litany of individuality to counter the collective hum. I would use the old brass ship's bell from my shop. Chloe would use a portable speaker she'd brought with her. The day we chose was the summer solstice. The town was at its peak, a symphony of looping perfection. The air was thick with anticipation. It felt like we were preparing for a battle. That afternoon, Chloe came to the shop, her backpack on. She was supposed to be gathering batteries for the speaker. She looked different. Her usual tense, analytical expression was gone. In its place was a soft, placid smile. Finn, she said, her voice bright and airy. I've been thinking. This plan of ours, it's so much work. So much stress. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over me. Chloe. I was down on the beach, she continued, her eyes looking past me, towards the window. And I just listened. Really listened. To the waves. To the town. It's so peaceful. Why are we fighting it? Chloe, no. That's the song. It's getting to you. She turned that serene, beatific smile on me. It was the same smile I'd seen on Liam, on Mrs. Gable, on 100 tourists. The contagion had her. My ally, my one connection to the real world, was gone. You worry too much, she said, her voice a perfect mimicry of tourist cheer. You should relax. Enjoy this place. It's paradise. She reached out and patted my arm. First time here. You'll love it. The words hit me like a physical blow. The hope that had sustained me for weeks evaporated, leaving a hollow, echoing void. She turned and walked out of the shop, leaving her notebook, her charts, her entire identity on the table. She walked across the street and sat on the bench, not to watch the loops, but to join them. She stared out at the ocean with a look of blissful emptiness. I was alone again. More alone than before, because now I knew exactly what I was up against. And the sun was beginning to set. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The loss of Chloe was a profound, shearing blow. It wasn't a betrayal, it was an absorption. She hadn't chosen to leave me, she had been erased. The quiet contagion had won her, and now it was just me, the last dissenting whisper in a chorus of serene madness. The setting sun painted the windows of my shop in hues of orange and blood. The time for planning was over. Her notebook lay open on the table. The system can't handle true spontaneity. Her words. Her theory. It was all I had left. The world outside was beginning its daily ritual. The hum from the ocean seemed to swell, a resonant chord that vibrated through the floorboards. I looked out the window. Down on the esplanade, the looping conversations were faltering. People were slowing down, their heads starting to turn towards the sea like heliotropic flowers. Chloe was among them, her face tilted up, a perfect picture of peace. My confrontation couldn't be with them. They were just puppets. My fight was with the puppeteer. The reef. The song. The system. I grabbed the heavy brass bell from its hook behind the counter. Its surface was cool and solid in my trembling hands. I grabbed the clapper. The weight was real. I was real. I had to be. I burst out of the shop door and onto the street. The light was golden, thick, and syrupy. The world was holding its breath. Every single person within my line of sight was now stock still, facing the ocean, as the top edge of the sun kissed the horizon. The collective sigh began. A soft, pervasive exhalation of contentment. Ayaha. In that moment of perfect, synchronous worship, I broke the script. I didn't turn to the sea. I turned to the town. I lifted the brass bell and began to ring it, not with a steady rhythm, but with a frantic, chaotic, desperate clangor. Clang clang. Clang. Clang clang clang. The sound was violent, an act of sonic vandalism in the tranquil landscape. Heads jerked in my direction. The serene smiles flickered, replaced by expressions of utter confusion. The puppets were seeing something that wasn't in their code. And I started shouting. Not goodbye, but something more specific, more personal. I poured every memory I had, every piece of scraped-together individuality, into the world. Kev. I roared, pointing at the butcher who was staring at me, his mouth agape. Your dog's name was Scruffy. A border collie. He chased my bike every day for a year. Clang. Clang. Mrs. Gable. Elspeth. You gave me a scar on my knee. I fell off the stool trying to steal a donut from your cooling rack. You gave me a band-aid and a donut. I spun towards the surf club, towards the spot where I knew Liam would be. Liam. We stole your dad's Playboys from the shed and hid them in the roof of the surf shack. We were 12. The world began to fracture. It wasn't a gentle warping anymore, it was a shattering. The cheerful pastel colors of the storefronts began to drain away as if the saturation was being dialed down to zero. The vibrant blue of the sky bled into a bruised, sickly gray. The golden sunlight vanished, replaced by a cold, perpetual twilight emanating from no discernible source. The people, my neighbors, my friends, didn't scream or run. They froze. Their faces went slack, the confusion wiped away and replaced with nothing. Their eyes, which had been vacantly pleasant, were now true voids, black and empty. They were dolls with their strings cut, standing silent and still in the gray husk of the town. Chloe was among them, a statue of a backpacker, her face utterly blank. The beautiful illusion of Coral Bay dissolved, and I saw the truth. The buildings were hunks of crumbling, salt-stained concrete, adorned with alien-looking barnacles that pulsed with a faint, internal light. The road was cracked, pitted earth. And the sea was a calm, black oil slick under the alien sky. The reef, offshore, was no longer a line of breaking waves. It was a thing. A vast, crystalline structure that rose from the black water, its facets catching the dim light. It was geometric and organic at the same time, like a colossal, living geode. And it was breathing. A low, powerful hum emanated from it, the true sound that the waves had only mimicked. This was the predator. The psychic pitcher plant. The postcards. The tide remembers. The truth had been here all along, buried under layers of pleasantness. The prisoners weren't in a jail, they were in the stomach of a beast, and the town was its digestive tract, slowly breaking down their consciousness into a simple, nutrient-rich slurry of happiness. I stood there, panting, the bell silent in my hand, alone in the real Coral Bay. The gray, dead truth of it. My act of chaos hadn't freed anyone. It had only broken the illusion for me. I had peeled back the label and seen the terrifying machinery underneath. The hum from the crystal reef intensified, and I felt it in my mind now, not as a song, but as a direct inquiry. A cold, immense pressure. It was aware of me. The anomaly. The bug in the code. I had a choice. A terrible, stark choice. Behind me was the town, the gray, silent husk filled with the empty shells of people I once knew. I could walk back among them, let the illusion reassert itself. I could let the song soothe my terror, erase the awful knowledge of this reality. I could surrender. Be filed away. Perhaps, in a way, it would be a mercy. Ahead of me, the road out of town stretched into the gray twilight. It was no longer looping. It was a real road, leading away from the coast, into an unknown, desolate landscape under a sky I didn't recognize. There was no guarantee of what lay at its end. Was this the real world, or just a deeper layer of the prison? There was no way to know. To step onto that road was to embrace the horror, to choose the terrifying unknown over the comforting lie. Don't forget the way out. The postcard's words echoed in my mind. The way out was not just leaving the town. It was leaving the loop. I stood on the precipice between the two realities, the dead town and the dead road. The cold pressure in my mind grew, a silent command to return, to be welcomed, to be at peace. I looked at Chloe's frozen, empty form one last time. I thought of Liam and Mrs. Gable. I could not save them. But I could still save myself. Or what was left of me. I took a step. Not back into the familiar street, but forward, onto the cracked earth of the road. As my foot touched the ground, a new voice spoke in my head. It wasn't the hum of the reef. It wasn't the cheerful chant of the town. It was my own voice, but it was calm, clear, and utterly alien. Welcome, it said. Welcome again. I had broken free from the town's loop, only to find the contagion had found a new host. It was inside me now, adapting, creating a new loop just for one. The road stretched on before me, an endless gray path into the unknown. And I began to walk, a prisoner who carried his own cage with him, forever. The color beneath. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life is a catalogue of reds. It's the iron oxide in a Sienese primitive, the cochineal ground for a Titian robe, the cadmium screaming from a Munch sky. I am an art restorer. Precision is my religion, and color matching is its most sacred rite. My studio, a small, whitewashed box overlooking a Kreuzberg courtyard, is a temple to this faith. Jars of raw pigment line the shelves like relics, azurite, malachite, lapis lazuli. And the reds, of course. A dozen shades of red, each with a history, a chemistry, a soul. I came to Berlin from Chicago to escape a world that had become too loud, too saturated with a particular kind of grief. Lena's favorite dress was the color of arterial blood. After she was gone, I saw it everywhere. In stop signs, in neon bar signs, in the garish packaging of cheap groceries. Berlin, with its bruised concrete and muted palette, was supposed to be my balm. Here, I could focus on the quiet histories trapped in canvas, resurrecting colors that had faded centuries before I was born. My world had shrunk to the 10 by 10 meter space of my studio, and I was grateful for its smallness. My landlord, Herr Schmidt, a man whose posture seemed to have been permanently shaped by a lifetime of disapproval, would occasionally rap on my door to complain about the turpentine smell. My only other regular human contact was Katia. She was a street artist, a whirlwind of spray paint and kinetic energy whose work exploded across the brick wall opposite my window. Her murals were loud, defiant, and full of a life I was actively trying to avoid. We had a nodding acquaintance, a silent agreement of coexistence between the old and the new. She created, I preserved. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick of the light. I was walking home late, the October air crisp and smelling of damp leaves and distant doner kebabs. The sodium streetlights cast a jaundiced glow, bleaching the world of its subtleties. But on Katia's newest mural, a sprawling, Bosch-like cityscape of Berlin populated by robotic bears and mythic creatures, there was a line. It wasn't painted on the wall, it looked like it was in the wall, a hairline crack that had filled with something impossible. It was a color, but that word is inadequate. It was the deep, abyssal black of a starless night sky, yet it held a slick, oily shimmer, like a puddle of gasoline. It swirled with hints of violet and indigo, but trying to name them was like trying to cup water in your hands. It was a color that seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a tiny void of perception. I stopped, staring. It was a single, branching vein, no thicker than a thread, running from the claw of a painted bear down to the crumbling mortar. A chemical reaction, I told myself. Some new, experimental paint reacting poorly with the cheap sealant on the old brick. Or vandalism. Some kid with a new type of ink. I was tired. My eyes spent 10 hours a day differentiating between Venetian and Florentine umber. Of course they were playing tricks on me in the dark. I went inside, locked my 3 deadbolts, and tried to forget about it. The next morning, I saw Katia out by the wall, touching up a section with a can of spray paint that hissed like an angry cat. Morning, I called from my window. She glanced up, a smear of teal on her cheek. Elias. You're up early. I saw something on your wall last night, I said, trying to sound casual. A weird, dark line. Looked like a chemical burn. She ambled over to where I had seen it, squinting. Ha! Don't see anything. The brick's a mess, always crumbling. She ran a hand over the spot, her calloused fingers brushing against the paint. Probably just damp. She shrugged, the dismissal absolute. Vandals, maybe. Or just the walls settling. Happens. I leaned out, trying to see it from her angle. The line was gone. In the flat, unforgiving light of day, there was nothing but painted brick. Had I imagined it? The memory of it was so vivid, the specific non-color of it. I felt a prickle of unease. Stress, I concluded. Grief does strange things to the mind. My therapist in Chicago had warned me about dissociation, perceptual distortions. This was just that. My brain, glitching. A few days later, the glitch happened again. I was in a small gallery in MIT, scouting for potential work. A stark, minimalist exhibition. White walls, single pieces given acres of space. On the far wall hung a large abstract canvas, a slash of violent crimson against a stark white background. But in the center of the red, like a pupil in a bloodshot eye, was a single, perfect dot of it. The same shimmering, light-devouring non-color. I walked closer. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had the same quality, that oily, multi-hued depth. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, a reflex for documentation. I aimed, focused, and snapped the photo. When I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. In the photo, there was only the red slash. The dot wasn't there. It showed up as a dark, pixelated smudge, a digital artifact, nothing like the profound, dimensional void I was looking at with my own eyes. It's something, isn't it? The gallery owner, a woman with severe black glasses, materialized at my elbow. The dot, I stammered, pointing. What is that pigment? I've never seen anything like it. She followed my finger, her expression blank. The dot? Yes, the black, the dark, shimmering. I trailed off. She was looking at me as if I'd grown a second head. The piece is called Rotwund, she said coolly. Red wound. There is no dot, sir. It is a field of red on canvas. She gave me a tight, concerned smile and glided away, leaving me alone with the painting and the cold certainty that I was either losing my mind or seeing something no one else could. I tried to find a rational explanation. I spent a night researching exotic pigments online. Vantablack, Singularity Black, paints engineered to absorb nearly all light. The descriptions were close, but they didn't account for the shimmer, the hint of color within the blackness, the way it felt alive. Ingrid, a fellow restorer whose studio was a few blocks away, a woman of formidable pragmatism, looked at the blurry photo on my phone and snorted. That's the new gimmick paint from a Swiss company. The kids are using it. Sprays on like a normal black, but it has these microprismatic particles that only catch the light at weird angles. You probably just saw it funny. Go home, Elias. Get some sleep. Her explanation was a life raft, and I clung to it. It was plausible. It made sense. My eyes were strained. The lighting was weird. I was projecting my own internal darkness onto the world. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. I was fine. The world was fine. The mantra held for almost a week. Then, one Tuesday, Herr Schmidt knocked on my door. Not his usual sharp rap, but a soft, hesitant tapping. I opened it to find him standing in the hallway, staring at the wall opposite my apartment. It was a drab, institutional beige, stained with decades of phantom leaks and scuff marks. Herr Schmidt? Is everything all right? He didn't turn. He was staring at a patch of faint discoloration, a place where the paint was peeling slightly. Wunderschön, he murmured. Beautiful. It's just damp, I said, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. I can smell the mildew. He turned to me, and his eyes, usually a watery, cynical blue, seemed unfocused, glassy. No, no, he said softly, his voice distant. Not the damp. The color. He gestured vaguely at the peeling paint. It's always been there, you know. Just, underneath. My blood ran cold. I could see it. A tiny, spiderweb-thin tracery of the impossible color, nested in the cracks of the old beige paint. It was barely there, a whisper of a thing, but it pulsed with that same familiar, sickening shimmer. As if waking from a trance, Herr Schmidt blinked hard and straightened up, his usual gruffness returning like a mask. "Ah, Elias. The pipes in this building are a disgrace. A disgrace. I must call the plumber again. He robs me blind, that one." He shuffled off down the hall, muttering to himself, the moment of strange lucidity gone as if it had never happened. I stood in my doorway, staring at the wall. He had seen it. He had seen it and called it beautiful. The rationalizations fell away, shattering like glass. This wasn't my grief. This wasn't stress. It wasn't a new kind of paint. It was something else. Something quiet and creeping and utterly, terrifyingly real. And I wasn't the only one who could see it. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The city had become a scavenger hunt for shadows. I named the color umbra, from the Latin. It seemed fitting for something that lived in the darkest part of the shade, a color defined by the absence of light. I started a journal, a simple black moleskine, filling it with sketches of the patterns I found. They were always geometric at first, like crystalline growths or frost patterns, before they coalesced into more organic, vein-like structures. I documented each sighting with a location, date, time, and a description of the ambient light. The journal became my anchor, the only proof that I wasn't unmoored from reality. Umbra was no longer just appearing on things, it was starting to feel like it was emerging from them. It was as if the color was a fundamental substrate of the world, and the reality I knew was just a thin, peeling coat of paint on top of it. One afternoon, I took the U-Bahn to the East Side Gallery, needing to see something iconic, something solid. I stood before the famous mural of Brezhnev and Honecker locked in their fraternal kiss. And there it was. Not a splash of graffiti, but a network of fine umber lines spreading through the gray of Brezhnev's suit, crawling up his neck, and branching across Honecker's cheek like a dark, subcutaneous disease. It was changing the art, rewriting it from within. My isolation deepened. The world had split into two versions, the one everyone else saw, and the one I saw. The latter was a place of creeping horror, and I was its sole inhabitant. I tried to talk to Katya again, more urgently this time. I found her working on a commissioned piece for a new cafe, a vibrant explosion of yellow and magenta. I opened my journal on the small table where she was mixing paints. "Katya, please, just look." I pointed to my sketches, the careful notes. "It's spreading. It's in the East Side Gallery. It's changing things." She glanced at my notebook, then back at me. Her eyes, which I'd always thought of as a sharp, intelligent brown, now seemed to hold a new depth, a glossy, placid quality. There was no annoyance in her expression this time, only a calm, unnerving pity. "Elias," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Art is supposed to change. It's not meant to be static, locked in a museum." She picked up a brush. As she did, I saw it, a smudge of umbra on her thumb, not on the skin, but seemingly under it, like a bruise that shimmered. "Maybe you're just finally seeing things as they really are." She turned back to her canvas, dipped her brush in yellow, and began to paint. But she wasn't looking at the canvas. Her gaze was fixed on the empty space beside the yellow streak she was making, a look of intense, serene concentration on her face. A few hours later, I walked past the cafe again. The mural was finished. And in the empty space Katya had been staring at, there was now a swirling, intricate vortex of umbra, perfectly integrated into the composition. She hadn't painted it. She had willed it. My attempts to find answers became more frantic. I managed to scrape a tiny sample of the umbra from a loose flake of brick on an abandoned building. It felt strange to the touch, both slick and dry, and it seemed to absorb the warmth from my fingertip instantly.